Our story begins at Dunkey University, in Building A. In a half-empty classroom sits our hero. At this time, Lin Mu is puzzling over the solution to one of the problems that proved to be too difficult for him. There was silence in the auditorium, but suddenly, it was broken by successful footsteps. A group of young girls entered the room and immediately caught the eyes of everyone present. One of the girls was called Du Xiaoyue. The guys in the audience immediately started whispering and discussing how cute and beautiful she was, even though she was a freshman. The black-haired girl really was insanely attractive. Her silky black hair fell straight down to her face, and her violet eyes were burning through. Everyone around her was talking about how incredibly beautiful she was. No one understood why she had entered this university. At this time, the girls were discussing Lin Mu, who the black-haired girl appeared to be engaged to. Her friend noticed that he looked boring. Du Xiaoyue herself is not happy about the fact that she is engaged to him. She would rather remain a bachelor than marry such a scumbag. A moment later, a company of self-confident girls approach the protagonist, who sits quietly in his seat. One of the girls walks the fastest and overtakes her friends, approaching a young boy. After a couple seconds, she slams the table, leans on it, and gets the main character's attention. The bitch looks down at the young man and asks him to sit down, because they want to take this seat, even though there are plenty of empty desks in the back. But the cocky girl is not going to back down and reiterate that this is where they want to sit. She looks down at his notebook and is surprised that he can't solve such a simple problem. Such scum should definitely be in the back of the class. The young lad doesn't know how to respond to that, so he silently raises his green eyes and looks at the bitch with irritation. The young man looks at his bride, who looks away with complete indifference. Suddenly, someone's masculine hand grabs at the hero by the shoulder. It was his classmate who also told him to move since he was asked by such beautiful girls. The protagonist is under pressure from all sides, so he has nothing to do but pack his belongings in a bag, after which he heads away, leaving the bitch behind him, who escorts him with a look. The young lad walks silently beside his sister-in-law, who in turn continues to remain silent. But a moment later, Du Xiaowei shouts after the guy that he is a miserable coward. The girl humiliated him. Bitch can't believe someone like this loser could get into this university. He must just have connections. But as long as the black-haired girl can break off the engagement, and absolutely don't care where he goes to school, the protagonist headed outside. It was already quite dark. The young man stands on the curb and waits for the moment to cross the road. The young lad went deep into his thoughts, which took over the mind. His gaze was downcast. In his head, the young man was replaying the girl's words about him being a coward. It was clearly hardwired into the subcortex of his brain. This engagement was organized by their parents, and it's not our hero's fault. He didn't want this to happen. The black-haired kid decides to ditch all those bad thoughts and go home to check on his grandfather. Moments later, a cab pulls up to the guy and he gets into it. In his mind, he hopes that his grandfather is doing well. Some time passed, and finally the protagonist arrived at the Lin family mansion, his home. It was quite beautiful here, and everything looked very rich. The young lad walked to the entrance and thundered a call to his grandfather to let him know he had arrived. The young man passed his hand under the door, but stopped abruptly as if listening for something. Lin Mu heard loud noises and concluded that his relatives must be arguing again. Moments later, the boy dared to cross the threshold of the house. He went inside and saw his relatives there. They were all gathered. There were 2 men sitting in the spacious living room, and 1 woman standing. Everyone was focused. There was a tense atmosphere in the room. Lin Ron's aunt greeted the guy and informed him that Grandpa had gone to the hospital for a checkup and should be back very soon. Hearing this, the main character decided to head to his room so he wouldn't have to stay here with them. A sepulchral silence hung in the room. The young boy silently walked past his relatives and directed them to his room. But unexpectedly, Lin Yitai's elder uncle rebuked our hero for having no manners at all since he didn't even salute them. Unexpectedly, Lin Yif's second uncle expressed his lack of understanding about why they should take care of Grandpa. The bearded scumbag didn't seem to care at all about his condition. He didn't have long to live anyway. A few hours passed and it was lunchtime. Grandpa had already returned home. Lin Mu told him that it was good to take good care of him, for he would have no classes for the next few days. Grandpa looked very tired and sick, but he was very happy that his grandson would take care of him. Grandpa has been in this condition since Mom and Dad were gone, and no one knows if he will ever get better. Suddenly, the aunt called our hero and called him to dinner, for the table was already set. The black-haired lad was greatly saddened by thoughts of his grandfather, but still had to eat nonetheless. After a while, all the relatives gathered around one large table with many dishes on it. One of the men intended to start a serious conversation with the others. They are organizing an auction soon, but he has yet to be given the authority to make the decision to organize. He's having trouble with that. He didn't linger long and announced that he wanted to be headed to the auction department. But the bearded man immediately stepped into the grip. He offered his candidacy and called to supposedly help his relative. Suddenly, the young boy puts down his chopsticks and sets the food aside. He talks about being full and going to his room. In fact, he just doesn't want to listen to this nasty talk. The protagonist heads to his room while the men continue to argue loudly about who should take over. It seemed that the young boy was tired of putting up with all these quarrels and scandals. He went out onto the balcony to catch his breath. Lin-Mu is very sorry that his parents left this world so early and left him alone. Unfortunately, the young man is shallow and is well aware that their family is quickly falling apart. Our heroes are filled with hate and despair, but he realizes how he can make an impact and change anything. Suddenly, his musings are interrupted by a bearded man who also goes out onto the balcony. The nasty man immediately realizes that the young man misses his parents again. It's written all over his face. The black-haired kid doesn't want to talk to his uncle and doesn't understand why he came and disturbed his peace. The man just thought the guy hadn't had enough dinner, so he decided to check on him. There were 4 of them. 4 siblings, not 3 and our hero's father, but only our hero's father inherited his grandfather's skills. Grandfather insisted on Lin-Mu's father succeeding him, even though the family continued to go under. The scumbag changes the subject and adds that people shouldn't get something they can't handle. It can cause problems. The black-haired boy doesn't understand what his uncle is getting at and abruptly turns around to question him about it. But suddenly, a strongly masculine hand pushes the protagonist forward, and the guy can't keep his balance. And then, just moments later, the defenseless kid goes straight to the ground. Nothing can save him now. Our hero screams loudly, but realizes that nothing can be changed. This is a situation of complete hopelessness. A moment later, the protagonist collapsed on the pavement. He no longer moves or breathes. Blood slowly spreads puddles around his cold body. Meanwhile, the bearded man watches what he has created with his own hands for power. He doesn't seem to regret it at all, as a smirk appears on his face. He's just determined to connect you to the guy's parents. Soon there is commotion in the mansion, as a man screams that our hero has fallen off the balcony. At this time, the doctor is in his office filling out some work on his laptop. Suddenly, a nurse bursts into the doctor's office and is very nervous. She is looking for Dr. Joe. The nurse reports that a patient who fell from the balcony has arrived at their hospital. The head doctor is looking for Dr. Joe. The girl's ready to do her job. She's going to go to the chief of medicine right now. Meanwhile, the protagonist has already been brought to the emergency room. The doctors are crowded around Lin-Mu. They are all ready to fight for the young boy's life to the end. The black-haired boy is covered in blood and not moving at all. Can the doctor save the boy? After a while, Dr. Joe enters the office and immediately gets down to business and inquires about the patient's condition. The other doctors bring her up to speed right away, reporting a lot of internal bleeding on the guy. The girl is very talented at acupuncture, and she has one method, but it's very risky. The doctor understands how high the risks of this procedure are, but the most important thing now is to save the patient. The girl doctor could not delay. Because every second counted, she began to select the right needle, and so a moment later, the girl pointed the sharp needle toward the patient, then got down to business. And so in a few minutes, everything was ready. There were thin but sharp needles sticking out of our hero's head. Another nurse looked at the machine and saw that, thankfully, the patient was stabilized. She used the needles to stimulate a hit or run state. But if the brain is in that state for long, it will simply die off. Upon hearing this, the doctors immediately began to start the operation, because there was not a second to lose. When the doctors looked at the machine, they saw that the patient's heart rate had risen above normal, and this was very dangerous. The head doctor immediately became nervous, because he realized that their method did not work, and the patient's life hung in the balance. The man sternly ordered the other doctors to prepare a defibrillator. The doctors immediately started resuscitation, and tried their best to start Lin-Mu's heart with a 200-volt charge. From such a strong discharge, the young lad's breathless body twitched violently and bounced. The doctor monitored the numbers on the machine and was horrified when he realized it wasn't working. They decided to try a 300-volt discharge. But, unfortunately, this attempt was also unsuccessful. The black-haired boy's heart refused to beat again. The man sadly reported that the patient had lost his last signs of life. The operation was a failure. A tense and dreary atmosphere hung in the office. Now they must report this terrible news to the patient's guardians. The doctors had resigned themselves to the fact that this operation had failed. There was nothing they could bring back. A moment later, the nurse covered the young lad's cold body with a cloth, as all doctors usually do. When the finishing touches were done, the doctors headed away from the office to offer their condolences to the loved ones of the deceased. Suddenly, the apparatus that was showing Lin-Mu's vital signs a second ago glowed brightly. And a moment later, some sort of strange black hole began to appear on our hero's covered body. This black hole is getting bigger and deeper. It feels like a water vortex or a black hole in space. Something strange began to happen in the ward. A black hole formed in the air, and the wind tore the sheet off our hero. A moment later, some strange bright light appeared out of that black hole and headed towards the young boy. Suddenly that color touched the main character's body and slowly began to penetrate inside to him. Something strange was clearly happening to the black-haired boy's body. A moment later, all the light went inside the boy. A couple seconds later, a translucent fist appeared above Lin Mu's body and grabbed a violet light. My fist clenches that color harder and harder and won't let it go. A moment later, the young lad's body simply rose into the air and began to float. How did that happen? Some so-black energy began to merge with each other and slowly penetrate the guy's body. Soon this black energy formed a ring around the young man's finger. The light continued to slowly seep in. Something strange had obviously happened that night. Our hero was still unconscious. The black-haired boy's mouth opened slightly. Is it possible that the chances of his life are not yet lost? That's how this strange night passes, and the next morning comes. The hospital corridors are empty, and only Dr. Joe is standing there thinking. The girl is very sleepy, for she did not sleep well that night. Suddenly, she hears loud screams from the nurses. It makes her instantly wake up and feel awake. She doesn't realize where the screams are coming from. The girl didn't hesitate for a second, and immediately rushed over screaming to find out what had happened. When she ran into the office, she saw two nurses huddled together in fear. The nurses were in a panic. The girls were crying at what they had just seen. It made the blood in their veins stop. Dr. Joe looked around the office and was also shocked at what appeared before her. The main character was lying on the couch, but there was clearly something wrong with him. He wasn't even wearing the sheet they left behind. The doctor watched the guy carefully and realized that this patient had grown overnight. But how was that possible? Then, the doctor touched the young lad's body, trying to figure out what caused his body to react this way. But the girl gets even more shocked when she realizes that her body, which was cold even tonight, is now warm again. A moment later, to test his hunch, the doctor brings his index finger to the patient's nose to check his breathing. Immediately after this action, the main character opens his bright green eyes wide, and as if rising from the dead. Everyone in the office is frozen in fear and sepulchral silence. They found it hard to believe what had just happened before their eyes. The nurses start screaming insanely loudly that there is none other than a zombie in front of them. The doctor immediately reassured the nurses, saying that the patient must have experienced clinical death. The boy was clearly as surprised as he was by what was going on around him. He didn't understand what kind of people were around him. And the black-haired boy was also wondering where he was now. He didn't seem to remember anything. His green eyes ran quickly around the office and downward. He seemed to have a lot of questions. As it turned out, the young man didn't even remember who he himself was. Lin Mu was in a complete stupor. Immediately after these events, the black-haired kid was sent to the ICU. The young lad was at once under the care of the doctors, for it was a very severe and strange case. Was it possible that the needles had damaged the point that was responsible for memory, and that was why Lin Mu couldn't remember anything? But could this harm have been severe enough for our hero to forget his own name and all information about himself? Dr. Joe reassured the patient and assured him that it wouldn't be long before the boy's memories would come back to him. It's time for the girl to leave on other business. If our hero needs something, he can press the button and a nurse will come to him. Now the main thing is to rest. After a moment, the doctor turned around and headed towards the exit, leaving the young man in the room all alone. And so soon the doors slammed shut, and the protagonist was left alone with himself and his thoughts. The black-haired boy lies in bed and reflects on all that has happened today. Lin Mu couldn't sense any spiritual ki in the place he was in, and this body is much weaker than his past body. He used the last bit of spiritual ki to escape from creating a new body for himself. Otherwise, death would have awaited him. The young man never imagined that he, the greatest cultivator in the world, would end his life like this. The one who found himself in the body of our hero is serious about taking revenge on his offenders and destroying every last one of them. Meanwhile, loud screams can be heard in the Lin family's mansion. They can be heard all over the place. It was a bearded man who shouted. He was very angry that his nephew was alive, even though he had received news of his death earlier. But when he realized his nephew didn't remember anything, he calmed down a bit and told the doctors to take care of him. Auntie also did not understand what was going on, because not long ago, and did not receive the news of the death of his relative. The bearded man was furious, and did not understand himself how this could have happened, for he had accepted his death. The woman doesn't understand what it means that the guy has lost his memory. Is he going to be a vegetable now? The man was amused that it meant the same thing to his aunt. It even brought a faint smirk to his face. But now there was the question of what they should do next. Would it be necessary to change their plans? The man told his aunt to go and check on the boy, because she is the closest thing to him, and they can't reveal themselves right now. The woman must not only check his condition, but also find out if our hero has really lost his memory. Black-haired kid is in his room watching TV like nothing ever happened. Suddenly, a young guy is distracted from watching TV by a knock on the door. He allows the guest to enter. Dr. Joe walked into his room, but she didn't seem to be by herself. Auntie had come to visit Lin Mu after all, and the doctor was trying to see if the patient would recognize his relatives. But the black-haired boy reminded him that in his condition, he couldn't remember anyone or anything, so it was useless to ask. The woman introduced herself as his aunt and was surprised that the guy really didn't seem to remember anything. Having found out all the necessary information, the woman was about to leave, wished the young lad more rest. Then she went to the doctor, for she had a question as to why her nephew was beginning to look different as well. As it turned out, the young man's face was damaged due to the fall, so doctors performed a minor surgery. The woman thanked the doctors for their work and asked them to take care of her nephew. At this time, she was thinking about the fact that her nephew had really forgotten absolutely everything, and it turned out to be pure truth. Thus, some time passed. The protagonist began to study books. He leafed through the pages enthusiastically. The soul that was in his body learned that there were 5,000 human race in this world, but the spiritual key was still weak. It wasn't all bad, because thanks to this book, the black-haired boy began to understand something. Fortunately, the young lad was almost cured, so the doctor gave her permission for him to be discharged from the hospital. The young man thanked the doctor profusely for taking care of him all these days and putting him on his feet. The doctor notices that the young lad acts like he comes from ancient times, and it amuses her a little. The black-haired kid was embarrassed by this, because now she knew his secret about him liking martial arts. The doctor told him to discharge and advised him to spend more time with friends and family, as this would speed up the process of getting his memory back. The protagonist, of course, listened to the doctor and headed away. He wanted to check out himself. After a while, a cab pulled up to our hero, ready to pick him up and take him home from the hospital. The car was traveling on city roads. Surprisingly, there were not many people on the highway. At this time, the guy was looking at everything outside the window and marveled at how much people were able to evolve with so little spiritual kui. After a while, a yellow car parks outside the university she attends. Lin Mu starts going through his pockets to find money to pay the cab driver. Cab service costs $50, but unfortunately the guy doesn't have that kind of money with him, and it makes him very uncomfortable. The young man tried to explain the situation about not having any money because he had just gotten out of the hospital. The cab driver is very surprised because the guy studies at a rather prestigious university and doesn't understand how this could happen. The man offers to call one of his friends to lend him money and pay him back. This is certainly a good idea, but the problem is that the main character doesn't remember anything. Accordingly, he doesn't remember his friends. The young boy does not understand how best he should act in such a situation, because he does not know anyone. Suddenly, some young girl looks in the car window. She seems to be a classmate of our hero. The young man explains the whole situation to the girl and asks her to pay for him. The student agrees without a problem, as she has some money. She wonders if Lin Mu has had plastic surgery, as his face has changed somehow. The protagonist promises to tell her everything as soon as he gets out of the car. That piques the girl's interest. The guys walked for a while, and during that time, he had time to tell the student all the things that had happened to him. A student listens with interest to such an amazing and creepy story from a classmate she knows. Moments later, she realizes that if the young man has lost his memory, he must not remember her. Unfortunately, the young lad really can't remember the girl, and sincerely apologizes for it. The girl immediately has a question whether there is a chance that the memory will one day return to the guy. But the protagonist himself isn't sure if there's any chance of getting his memory back. On the other hand, memory loss might not be a bad option. The girl admits that sometimes she wants to forget everything too. Suddenly, 3 girls come to meet the guys. The same girls with inflated self-esteem, who offend everyone. In the center is a black-haired girl of attractive appearance. That's our hero's fiancé. When she looks up, she immediately notices the main character and how much he has changed. Logically, the girl immediately assumes that the young guy has had surgery and changed his face. The black-haired kid denies it because he doesn't know how to react. He doesn't know anyone. The student gets into their conversation and remarks that the young lad now looks quite nice. The girl thinks he did it, so she would marry him, and immediately says that it doesn't change the fact that he is scum. The guys were still standing on the street and looking at each other. Our hero couldn't remember his fiancée and her bitch friends. The young lad immediately realized that the previous owner of this body must have been engaged to this black-haired girl. Moments later, the young man offered to break the engagement, since the girl was so unhappy with it. He betrayed it as if it were nothing. Hearing such words under her fiancé, the girl was furious and greatly surprised. This also surprised the other girls who were watching. Lin Mu shouted loudly about how he would never in his life want to marry such a vile and narcissistic girl like her. The black-haired girl was shocked that the guy showed his temper. It was quite bold and unlike him. It costs nothing for the young men to break the engagement. If they do, the girl will never bother him again. The student who was watching all this praised the kid for his courage. He really humiliated those bitches. After that, the guys turned around and headed away, hopefully never to be seen with that obnoxious girl again. The bitch just stared at the guy in silence. Her gaze was full of irritation and anger. How dare he treat her like that? The student was very happy for our hero because he finally got his little revenge and taught that bitch a lesson. The black-haired boy immediately realized that he had been a wimp before. Had he always been bullied like this? The student said that he used to be really bullied and it was a real shame. No one respected him. The main character was a little upset about letting the girl go so easily, knowing how badly she wanted to break off the engagement. But the student assures his friend that the girl is not worth more than that. There's no need to waste your time on her. But the black-haired kid doesn't regret what he just did one bit. The guys decide to change the subject, and the student calls to escort the young man to the right classroom and show him the way. So after a while, the guys walk up to the right office and open the door to go in. Suddenly, as they round the corner, a sharp dart flies straight towards the girl and nearly pierces her eye. But luckily, the girl catches the dart with one deft movement of her hand and prevents what could have happened to her. A student yells at a guy playing darts in class because it's very injury dangerous and he could hit a classmate. The kid was really embarrassed about it, and he immediately started apologizing when he realized that he had pissed off Tang Bei. The student added that the guy's dart skills aren't very good, so he shouldn't show off in public. Moments later, the girl made a sweeping motion of her arm with one slight movement of her hand, releasing the dart. This dart flew into the target. The girl didn't seem to make any effort at all, but it hit. The young boy silently watched what was happening in the auditorium. He had picked up on the fact that such precision of the girl was the level of measurement of the base. A student attracts the attention of her classmates because she wants to reintroduce Lin Mu in front of everyone. She explains that the guy was injured in the hospital and lost his memory, so they ask the guys to be sympathetic. They will try their best to bring back their classmate's memory. After this speech, all the students begin to applaud. The main character immediately picks up on the fact that Tang Bei is a pretty good person, and she's also popular in class. Suddenly, someone knocks on the door, after which they open it. A woman enters the auditorium and surveys the room with a glance. It was a pretty blue-eyed woman who looked like a teacher. She wondered if she had missed anything. Lin Mu turned to his friend and assumed that this woman who had just entered the auditorium was also their classmate, but that turned out to be not the case at all. Tang Bei laughed, for it was their instructor, Song Liangju. The guy felt embarrassed because he mistook the woman for a classmate. The teacher did not pay attention and called the student with her. The student told her friend not to hesitate and to follow Miss Song. He obeyed and went to the teacher. The instructor led him to her office, and first thing she asked him how he was feeling after being out of the hospital for so long. The student assured the instructors that he felt great, and he was confident that he was completely healthy. The woman is glad that things have gotten better for our hero, but if he suddenly has problems, he can turn to her. They finished talking, and at that moment someone knocked on the door. It was Tang Bei who had come to take Lin Mu out for lunch. After that, she wanted to show him around the university. They were just about done with the instructor, and the woman let the boy go. She was grateful to the student for helping the young man, but it wasn't hard at all for the female students to help the main character, because they were classmates. Moments later, the boys left the office and headed to the dining hall for a delicious meal. Carefully, she looked at Lin Mu after her. She noticed that the guy had changed not only externally, but also spiritually. His personality had changed. The guys were walking along the road, and the black-haired boy remembered how the girl had deftly thrown a dart earlier. She must be practicing somewhere? But the girl assured him that it was just nothing compared to her home workouts. To be honest, the young lad wouldn't have minded practicing, as he had been lying idle in the hospital for a very long time. The student touched our hero's shoulders and arms, and confirmed that the guy's body was indeed stronger than before. It was as if he had practiced long and hard. Could a fall from the balcony really be so beneficial? It's not worth it because the young man almost died, and the body he got in the aftermath is the only upside. Those words really got the student thinking. Naturally, it wasn't worth it. The young boy was surprised and asked the girl not to take it so literally. Tang Bei was just curious about what the kid planned to do next. Obviously, but the young man had no plans, for he couldn't even remember anything from the past. Moments later, the girl had a rather interesting question. Would a guy ever want to live his life differently? This spontaneous question took our hero by surprise. The guy was stunned and didn't understand what he was talking about. She explained that in the past, Lin Mu had been the kind of weakling who was constantly bullied and disrespected. But the current him has changed not only externally, but also internally. His personality has changed dramatically. She thinks this guy was given this chance by God to turn his life around. And if this is the case, the young man should take advantage of this opportunity 100%. The black-haired boy didn't quite understand what the student was saying, so he directly asked what he needed to do. Seeing the student's interest, the girl smiled behind her. She seemed to be enjoying it very much. Her eyes were full of excitement as she started talking about the dragon, their protectors. The young lad didn't understand what dragon protectors were being talked about, but he was instantly interested in the topic. But before continuing the story of their protector's dragon, the student has to talk about the world of martial arts. The girl starts her story from afar and asks if the kid believes that some people can kill with simple leaves. Though it sounds dubious, the main character immediately believes it and wonders if such people exist in their day. The student agrees, but says such special gifted people are very hard to find. Legends told that some masters were able to reach the Xiantian dimension. One day, her grandfather managed to get pretty close to it, but unfortunately, an inner demon managed to overpower Grandpa and caused him to lose all of his cultivation. Fortunately, Grandpa survived. The young man immediately began to console the student because the main thing is that her grandfather remained alive, and this is more important than anything else. There are many talented people in the Tang sect, and Bibi believes that someone will be able to reach the Xiantian dimension and glorify their sect. The main character was greatly surprised when he heard about this sect. He thought it was located in Sichuan. The girl assumed he was thinking of a cult from one martial arts novel. It wasn't. The sector exists beyond the novels. They are masters of poisons and hidden weapons. At the very peak, they had many Xiantian experts. The black-haired kid is curious to know all about it and wonders how strong they were. Her grandfather had told her that all of their techniques were created by Xiantian experts. Most likely, Xian experts are equal in strength to the foundation measurement level, and this greatly surprises the young man. And dragon protectors were created by the government for special occasions. That's why some sects send their disciples to the team to break through faster. Tang Beibai is the coach of one of the teams. But is our hero allowed to join the team if he is not a cult member? There are no inhibitions here. His potential, combined with good training, will allow him to become much stronger. These words make the young man think. It seems to be quite an interesting and favorable offer. After a moment, our hero accepts the offer, for he wants to live a different life. He will cling to every opportunity. Thus a few hours passed, and a dark night came over the city. The city looked very bright and fairy tale-like at this time of day. The guys were heading to the Tenglong Corporation. It was a multi-story building with windows lit up with different colors. The student led the young boy behind her. The young man thought that the base of the Dragon Defenders was right in the center of the city. It really was, because as an important agency for the government, not just can't be located somewhere in the mountains, for example. And if there is a sudden urgency, agency workers can quickly respond and help. The black-haired boy thought about it for a while and came to the conclusion that it was indeed the right decision. Soon the boys went inside the building and walked down the hallway, present in front of the elevator. A moment later, the elevator arrived, and its doors opened with a small clang. The boys wondered if the whole building was their base. It's so huge. The young girl did not answer in any way, but only smiled enigmatically and took out some kind of map from her pocket. After that, she held the card up to the sensor and swiped it. A few seconds after that, something appeared on the screen. The girl explained that the Tenglong Corporation was just a disguise. At the same time, she pressed something on the screen. The young lady told the protagonist to just wait and do nothing. Soon they would be on the spot. Suddenly the elevator began to ride down, and this slightly startled Lin Mu, for he immediately backed up against the wall. A moment later, the elevator arrived at its destination and stopped with a quiet chime, alerting the people in the elevator. Soon the elevator doors slowly opened, and the student led the black-haired boy behind her. The boys were finally in the center of the Dragon Defender's base. It was just a white room filled with different technologies. There were a lot of people here, busy working. Immediately afterward, the girl led her friend into another office, on the floor of which some man was sitting. After a moment, the man opened his eyes, which were glowing with a bright yellow light. His gaze was very menacing and frightening. The man approached the young girl and asked what she was doing here so late at night. The young man noticed the glow of spiritual ki in this man. It seemed to have broken through the foundation dimension. But even so, the man was still a long way away from Xiantian's dimension. The girl informs Uncle Yan that she has brought him a new martial arts genius. The old man thought it was a joke, and the young man in front of him was Tang Bei's boyfriend. Besides, it was too late for him to learn martial arts. But the young girl immediately objected and told the man to personally check on the guest. The man soon gives in to the girl's pleas and believes her, deciding to test the young lad. The old man approaches his guest and examines him carefully, probing his body thoroughly. He is greatly surprised because our hero has a really strong body, although he does not master martial arts. The girl explains that Lin Mu is an ordinary guy, but after the fall his body has become many times stronger than before. After this story, the man immediately had questions about how this could have happened, but the main character himself did not know the answer to this question, because even in the hospital no one could not find out the reason. Since Tang Bei brought him here, he must know about the dragon protectors, and the man suggests he join them. But before joining the team, a guy has to pass a test, and if he does join, it won't be so easy to get away from them. But the young man has already been warned about it by the girl. She has explained all the rules to him, and he agrees to it. The man begins to prepare for the test, so that our hero will surely be able to pass it. He handed Lin Mu a book that contained a breath-holding technique. Immediately after reading it, he should burn it. You have to follow the instructions in the book, and when the guy has mastered the technique, he can come to the man. The young lad takes the book and sincerely thanks the man for the chance he has been given. They talk. The female student volunteers to take the participant to the test. The man lets them go, and so as soon as the guys leave the office, the old man laughs loudly. Well, what caused such laughter? Turns out he's glad that Bei brought this guy in. The Dunhai branch is about to get a new expert. Night still continues to reign in the streets. The full moon illuminates the sky. Our guys, meanwhile, head for the dormitory, with lights still on in the windows. The protagonist immediately set about learning. He carefully reads the information from every page of the book. The young man doesn't understand why Liu Shouyang's spiritual qi is so strange. Perhaps it is because of the weakness of this world. Suddenly something begins to appear on our hero's index finger. Something that looks like a ring. A moment later, a strange ring does appear on his finger, with black energy hovering around it. It's very interesting when he can get his hands on the items from the vault of this ring, since it's the only thing he has left from the past world. The sun will rise. A young boy will go looking for information about this world in the library. He needs to know everything. So the next day came, and our hero went straight to the library to learn new information. The young boy sat at the table and read the books carefully, trying not to miss any small details. Suddenly, the main character was distracted from his studies by a loud scream, and he turned around to see where it was coming from. When he averts his gaze, he notices the same girl at the next table and some blonde guy next to her. The girl had an altercation with some guy who was apparently hitting on her again. This blonde man was rich, so he thought they were perfect for each other, especially since they were both heirs to their families. The black-haired girl was very angry at this scoundrel, who clearly thought a lot of himself and allowed himself such insolent behavior. The girl didn't want to waste time on this scumbag, so she silently headed away from him. The scoundrel thought that the girl was only rejecting him because she was engaged to that loser from the Lin family. The brunette just ignores him, hoping that he will get off, but the insolent continues to insult our hero and self-assert himself at his expense. Suddenly the girl stops abruptly when she notices someone. She stopped when she saw our hero reading the book intently. He looked very focused. The blonde slasher also notices the protagonist and decides not to waste the opportunity to humiliate Lin Mu. But the black-haired kid doesn't respond in any way to the barbs from this rich scumbag and just ignores him. Such disrespect caused the blonde man to become extremely aggressive. How dare someone like him treat him so disrespectfully? The scumbag moves closer to the protagonist and looms over him, about to continue the humiliation. The young lad looks up and asks who this stranger is, for he has lost his memory and remembers nothing at all. The blonde man heard the news that he is engaged to Xiao Yue, so he tells him to break the engagement as soon as possible. But the young man calmly says that they have already canceled the engagement, and the girl's affairs do not bother him anymore. Hearing such information, the kid turned to the young girl behind him and asked if it was true. There was a girl behind me who made puppy dog eyes and said the above was a lie. A moment later, this blonde scumbag knocked the book our hero was reading right out of his hands. The book fell to the floor with a clatter. There was a dead silence in the air. The guy, of course, believed the girl and thought that our hero was deceiving him, so he wanted to teach him a lesson. The black-haired boy didn't respond to the stupid words that came from that scoundrel. Moments later, the protagonist grabs this badass by the scruff of the neck and prepares to teach him a lesson. The black-haired guy's gaze is full of hatred for such disrespect, but the blonde doesn't take him seriously. That's why in just a couple of seconds, the young man gathers all his strength into a fist and prepares to fight. A moment later, the creep is on the floor. A young boy throws him over his shoulder. The blonde coughs in pain and doesn't understand how this loser had the nerve to do such a thing. But as it turns out, that's not all, because the main character comes closer to him and steps on his body. The protagonist stepped on the belly of this scumbag, who was writhing in pain on the floor. He got what he deserved. After a moment, the young boy turns around and looks at the girl still standing there. The young men don't understand why the girl clings so tightly to this engagement. Does she really need it so badly? The black-haired girl doesn't want it, but those two old men need it. It's got to be done right. The young boy sighed heavily and grabbed his head. He had no idea it would be so annoying. He then turns to the badass and tells him not to go near him anymore, because technically she's his fiancée. The blonde man squirms in pain, but tries to get out of it with his reputation, reminding him that he's rich. The protagonist doesn't care at all about his financial situation and status, and he kicks it. This leg kick causes the scumbag to scream loudly in pain and promises he won't bother them again. The black-haired boy taught the bastard a lesson. He ordered him to disappear. The humiliated guy gets up off the floor and quickly heads away, trying to get away from the embarrassment as soon as possible. The guy is very depressed after being publicly humiliated, but he's not going to let it go, and he's going to get revenge. Everyone around them looked at the blonde man who was walking away from the library in shame. This immediately attracted the attention of everyone around him. Suddenly, a library worker came to such noise and clamor, reminding the place to be quiet. The black-haired kid quickly makes an excuse and reports that one of the students accidentally bumped into a table. Then the young man is volunteered to put all the fallen furniture back in its place. A black-haired girl approaches our hero and notices that he has changed a lot. She doesn't recognize him. But in this there are only pluses, because now our hero will have much less problems. The girl warned him that he needed to be careful from now on, because Wang Dong likes to take revenge. The young boy was amused by this and smirked slightly, then thanked the girl for the warning. When the young man was cleaning the library, he noticed the very book that the scoundrel had earlier knocked out of his hands. The protagonist noticed a phrase on one of the pages of the book. Someone has to finish what they started in case the enemies return. Since our hero had already learned this technique, he wanted to find Uncle Yan and get some new assignment. At this time, there was a real buffoonery and scandal going on in the Wang family home. The boss was shouting loudly and throwing things at his subordinates, saying that they were the most useless employees. They had all previously talked about how weak Lin Mu was, but then why did he dare to cross Wang Dong today and even break his arm? All the subordinates only shamefully lowered their eyes to the floor. They swore that they had reported what they had seen. Lin Mu used to be completely different. The mustachioed man seemed interested in those words and wanted to know more details. One of the subordinates explained that after the incident, Lin Mu had lost his memory and was not the same as before. Now he rarely even comes home. Upon hearing this, the man ordered the servants to bring the protagonist to him no matter what. All the subordinates obediently agreed with their boss's words and were ready to carry out the order. The mustachioed man with the beastly grin was determined to teach our hero a lesson. He would regret what he had done. The next day came. The weather was fine and the young boy walked through the crowded streets. Suddenly the young man had a strange premonition. It seemed to him that something was going wrong. Suddenly, a truck stopped in front of the black-haired kid. A moment later, 3 intimidating men emerged from it, searching for Lin Mu. These bigwigs reported that their boss was inviting a young lad in for a cup of tea, and he was obliged to turn up. The black-haired guy wasn't eager to go visit someone he didn't even know, but no one cared. If the young man did not agree to go with them of his own free will, they would take him away by force. The protagonist has nothing to do but agree, because he does not want to be beaten by these ambassadors. After a few seconds, the guy gets into the car. He remembered the girl's words that the Wang family really likes revenge, but it doesn't seem to bother the black-haired kid at all. On the contrary, it would only amuse Lin Mu. Some time passed, and finally our hero was brought straight to this boss, who in turn was eagerly waiting for him. The man was looking forward to meeting this scumbag who dared to be so brazen. The subordinates went out into the hallway to bring guests, while the man sat on the couch waiting for him. A moment later, a knock was heard on the door, and the boss immediately ordered the guest to enter. So the black-haired kid enters the office, and behind him are several of the boss's subordinates who don't let him escape. The man hints that the guy is going to get in trouble for what he did, but the guy doesn't even realize what he's gotten himself into. Soon the man's look changes, and he reminds him that Wang Dong is his son, and he won't allow him to be treated that way. But the young lad doesn't seem to care about that, as he continues to guffaw and doesn't take the words seriously. The man applauds the kid for his courage, as no one had dared to speak to him so disrespectfully before. Since our hero is from the Lin family, the scumbag decides to go easy on him. He'll let him go when the young man tears his tendons. But the protagonist is not as simple as it seems. Naturally, he is not burning with desire to fulfill such an order. Suddenly, one of the boss's subordinates grabs his shoulder and tells him not to cross their master. The young lad takes a blow to the head of this subordinate without a second thought. A moment later, Lin Mu grabs his hand and prepares to attack him, for he dared to interrupt their conversation. After a couple seconds, our hero throws the subordinate over himself, him on the table. Unfortunately, the man was unable to dodge the blow and flew straight into his boss's desk. A moment later, the man was on the floor and the table was smashed to pieces. The boss praised our hero's techniques. But even if the protagonist has some techniques, will they be enough to handle all the subordinates? The men surrounded the young lad, but he didn't seem at all worried, for he had a smile on his face. After a couple of seconds, the boss's patience broke and he ordered his subordinates to tear this insolent man to pieces. The protagonist is confident, so he tells his enemies to attack all together so they don't waste his time. The young lad gets into a fighting stance and bravely prepares to take all the blows of these formidable men. Thus, between the guys begin to fight. Our hero manages to hold firm and strike his enemies. Some time has passed, and the fight has finally come to an end. Our hero calmly adjusts the sleeves of his suit. The young boy was able to win the victory. All his enemies were lying on the floor without strength. The man was completely horrified and shocked when he saw all of his subordinates lying on the floor with no strength. How could this guy do such a thing? The protagonist, as if nothing had happened, says that they can now continue their conversation that was previously interrupted. The scumbag got scared to be in the same room with such a strong guy, so he offered him $20 million in compensation. The black-haired kid immediately realizes that this money was clearly obtained by dishonest and dirty ways. The scumbag immediately starts making excuses and talking about how this money is clean and earned honestly. The young boy believes these words and starts looking for something in the inside pocket of his jacket. After a moment, he pulls out his card from there and asks me to transfer the promised money to it. The man immediately agrees to do it, but first he needs a computer to perform all the necessary actions. Money passes some time, and this scumbag actually transfers the promised amount to the young man's card. The man turns the computer screen around and says that the guy personally verified the truth of his words. The protagonist thanks him. At this time, the man starts rummaging through his desk drawers. With an evil look, he tells the kid to take his time and not to leave so immediately. I think he's up to something. As it turned out, the scoundrel pulled out his gun, but has not yet shown it to our hero. And then, just a moment later, the bastard pointed the muzzle of the gun directly at the unarmed protagonist. The young lad stands and moves while the boss scoffs at his helplessness. But after a couple of seconds, the young man's lips spread into a chi and an amused grin. Is he really afraid? He didn't hesitate, and in one swift motion kicked the table where the scumbag was. Because of such a strong blow, the table flew straight towards the creep and pushed him, hitting him hard in the stomach. Such a hard blow caused the man to fly back into the wall and drop the gun. Now he was defenseless here. The man began to fear for his life and assured the guy that it was a misunderstanding and would not happen again. He begged for his life. I think it was the last one. There was nothing more to discuss in their conversation. The black-haired kid reminded him that he could kill him any second if he wanted to, so it was best not to unnerve him. The man began to humiliate himself before the young man Issa in loyalty to him. He said he was ready to do his bidding. Hearing such words, our hero becomes interested in this proposal. It seems he already has an idea in mind. Suddenly, a young boy grabs this scumbag by the throat, scaring him off. A moment later, he shoves something into the scumbag's mouth against his will. The young man then forces the scum to swallow what he just gave him and watch it closely. The man immediately tries to spit it out and find out what he just swallowed in the first place. Fear has taken over his whole body. As it turns out, it's poison. If the man behaves well, our hero will give him an antidote every 3 months. Otherwise, he will die a painful death. Having said that, the black-haired boy headed away, leaving this scumbag lying on the floor and thinking about his future life. The young man was about to leave the office, but suddenly the phone rang in his pocket. When the kid pulled out his phone and looked at the screen, he realized that he was getting a call from the same student, Tan Bei Bei. He picked up the phone without a second thought. The girl informed him that they had an urgent assignment and the guy had to come to the base. The protagonist, of course, obediently complied with the girl's request and headed to the Tenlon Corporation where the base was located. The young man came to the right place. There were quite a lot of people in the room and everyone was whispering while looking at the big screen and the stage. The young boy didn't understand at all why so many people had gathered here and what was going on. He tried to ask the girl for information. It didn't take long for the answer to come. The girl explained that they had recently caught the leader of a mercenary group, and his subordinates have taken about 20 people hostage, so now demands to trade them for the leader. But besides taking hostages, the mercenaries also want to attack the Pearl Tower. They just can't let that happen. The plan was to rescue the hostages and help the rest of the unit. That's the priority right now. The black-haired kid thought it would be just him and the student going to save people, but that turned out not to be the case at all. For if they had enough men, they would not have called for recruits. Lin Mu's assignment was to merely locate the hostages, then notify his elders. The man who stood in front of the whole crowd seemed to be one of the commanders. He turned to the crowd, drawing their attention to himself. The man assured everyone of the importance of this task. Since he had already explained the situation earlier, he was not going to waste time on it now. There was not a second to lose, because they could cost the lives of the hostages. That's why. The guys immediately set out on the mission. And so, without slowing down, the rescue team set off for the western neighborhood of Dokai City. It was quite beautiful here. The protagonist climbed to the roof of one of the buildings to scrutinize the situation and look around. It was very strange, for the rooms in the premises were completely empty, although Lin Mu could sense that there were many people here. Moments later, a young boy dares to jump down to check out what's going on here in person. The young man quickly pressed himself against the wall so that no one would notice him. He was as stealthy as possible, so as not to attract the attention of his enemies. The protagonist didn't understand what was going on here. He glanced out the window and was shocked to see no one there. But even so, the black-haired kid could sense the presence of people somewhere nearby. That means they've gone into hiding. Lin Mu gathered his thoughts and once again scrutinized the area, trying to find a single detail. Suddenly, a quite logical thought comes into our hero's head. He squats down and looks carefully at the sewer manhole. Turns out their enemies had been hiding here all along, right underneath them. It was much simpler than that. But now it was too early to rejoice. For first the young lad must test his theory, so he lifts the manhole cover. And as soon as the young man lifts the lid, he sees a bright light that comes straight from the depths of the sewer. Lin Mu looks inside and sees a long white staircase with a bright white light at the bottom. The black-haired guy decides not to hesitate and immediately goes down the stairs to now check the situation there. This was the secret base of their enemies. There were guards here as well, and at this time one of them was looking around their domain. Suddenly, the enemy guard heard a strange sound, so he immediately became alert and turned around to check what had happened. But it was too late. When the man turned around, he had no time to do anything, because our hero had already beaten him. Lin Mu firmly grabbed his neck with his legs, preventing him from retreating away. He clutched the enemy's neck tightly with his legs. It was extremely difficult for the man, and he obviously couldn't handle it on his own. So he desperately tried to call for help, but instead of screams, only a quiet wheeze came out. With each passing second, the man was losing consciousness, for air was gradually ceasing to enter his lungs because of the strangulation by his legs. Eventually, the strength completely left the unfortunate guard, who had been caught off guard, and he collapsed to the cold floor. The young boy was not confused. He seemed to have a plan. The young man began to quietly remove the clothes from the newly defeated guard. Once Lin Mu finished with this, he changed into the clothes of a guard and thus disguised himself. Thanks to this, he quietly made his way into their base. Our hero went straight to their boss's office. It was quite risky, but he turned out to be a very brave guy. The young man told the boss that something was wrong at the base. Accordingly, the boss immediately opened the door after these words to find out the reason for his guard's visit. The protagonist slowly continues his story, but keeps a close eye on his boss's every move so that he is always on guard. The black-haired kid immediately notices the bald man slowly bringing his hand closer to the gun on his belt. And so, just as the scumbag pulled the gun from his belt, the young lad quickly grabbed his wrist to prevent the worst from happening. The boss was not confused because he was good at martial arts. He took a sharp swing of his knee, preparing to deliver a powerful blow. But since our hero is not a timid guy, he immediately reacted and started to self-defense. Young blocks his foe's kick and strikes him back in the leg, causing him to break his bone with a loud crunch. The bald man immediately begins to scream, unable to contain the emotion in himself because it caused a lot of pain. The pain made the man unable to stay on his feet and collapsed to the floor, grasping at his injured leg. After a moment, the scoundrel was not confused and pointed the muzzle of the gun directly at Lin Mu, trying to reveal his identity. This bald scumbag threatened to shoot and finish him off if the young man didn't reveal his identity right here and now. Naturally, the black-haired kid didn't obey this, and a moment later he made a strong swing with his knee. The protagonist delivered a powerful knee strike right across the face of this scumbag, who didn't have time to react to such speed. Our hero's blow was so strong and accurate that his enemy simply blacked out and fell to the floor with a clatter. Lin Mu looked around the room. There were people who were huddled against the wall in fear and panic. It seemed that these were the hostages that needed to be freed. The protagonist looked around again and concluded that all the hostages must be here and they must be okay. The black-haired boy took a second look around the room and saw two suspicious bags that stood in the very corner of the room. Without a drop of fear, the young man went straight to those bags to check what was inside. And so, when the young man opened the bag, he was surprised at what he saw inside. The bag was completely full of money. That's unbelievable. Our hero looked carefully at the money, which was stuffed to the brim in his bag. The bills seemed to be real. Linmu was greatly surprised that these scumbags were able to steal so much money, so much in cash as well. The hostages still do not know who our hero is, so he decides not to lose such a wonderful opportunity, but on the contrary, to take advantage of it. After thinking about his plan for a bit, the black-haired kid zips up his bag like it's meant to be. Right after that, Linmu grabs both bags and heads for the exit. It turned out that the guy had decided to embezzle all that money for himself. One of the hostages watches the stranger carefully as he walks away. Her gaze fills with determination with each passing second. The girl came to the conclusion that this stranger had killed that scumbag just to get his money and escape. Suddenly, the girl's gaze catches what is on the floor. Hope appears in the girl's eyes. Turns out everyone had forgotten about the gun, which was now on the floor unattended. It seemed like a great opportunity. Seizing the opportunity, the girl deftly did a somersault and was near the gun with lightning speed. The brave girl grabbed her gun and pointed it at the back of the departing stranger, ordering him not to move. But this didn't seem to frighten the protagonist at all, as he only sighed irritably in response. The kid turns around and calmly explains to the hostages that he's not going to harm them. And now they're free to go. You can leave this room and escape. But the girl continues to stand her ground, for as it turns out, she is a police officer. She orders Linmu to drop the bags and put her hands behind her head. The guy doesn't give up either and offers a good deal. He leaves one bag to the guys and takes the other one for himself. That way everyone's on the plus side. But the girl officer continues to stand on her principles and threatens to shoot if our hero doesn't listen to her this very second. Unfortunately, the young lad has no choice but to obediently follow orders and throw the bags of money on the floor. Then the brunette turns to one of the hostages. She asks him to remove his belt in order to tie the stranger's hands. The man obeys the officer and removes his belt, then walks over to the guy who sits obediently on the floor and waits. But it didn't seem to be that simple. The young man was not going to give up, but only waited for the right moment, which had just appeared. The young boy jumps up sharply and pushes with all his might at the man who is just about to tie his hands. Because of such a strong blow, the man falls right towards the girl, who clearly did not expect such a stunt from a stranger. As a result, the man could not keep his balance and fell directly on the girl, thus immobilizing her for a while. Thanks to this, the protagonist was able to approach the girl and calmly take away her weapon, while still in one piece. The hostage pissed the guy off, and he ordered her to go back to the corner of the room and wait there for help. The officer had no choice but to obey, for our hero had a gun, and it was a threat to her life. In this way, the cunning fellow was able to take all the money for himself. Now he calmly headed for the exit from the premises. Finally, the young man opened the heavy doors and stepped out of the room. As soon as he did, he immediately began to remove the heavy body armor and clothing of the past guard. After a while, our hero took off all the clothes that belonged to the guard and put them back on the man, who was still lying on the floor without strength. After that, the mission was completed, and the young boy with a calm soul could go home to rest. After completing the task, the black-haired guy headed outside to rest for a while. He came to a well standing alone in the courtyard. The protagonist didn't hesitate for a second before throwing bags of money straight into this deep and dark well. Linmu doesn't part with the money. He plans to come and get it again as soon as it's over. When the young man finished his business, he immediately called Tang Bei to report that he had found something suspicious. Soon officers arrived on the scene and began taking turns, removing the hostages from the trap. The protagonist and his girlfriend watched in silence as the hostages left this horrible place. Our hero is summoned to go to headquarters to report back and say the mission is accomplished. They can proceed to the next part of the plan. A young student exhales with relief when the last hostage finally leaves the enemy base. Now everyone is safe. All the hostages are taken to a small bus, which has already pulled up to the right place. Now they will all be taken home to safety. The boys looked at the bus, which was getting farther away from them with each passing second. It was warming to realize that they had saved the hostages. But that's not all. The hostages said that something suspicious happened, so Tang Bei wants to personally inspect the scene. The black-haired boy looks questioningly at the student, not understanding what suspicious thing the hostages might have seen. It turns out that the hostages had already told them that the two mercenaries had gotten into a fight, but when the officers arrived, two were already out. The guys enter the very room where the incident took place. The girl looks around and realizes that the dirty money is nowhere to be found. Whoever knocked out those two mercenaries must be a true master at his craft. It was done with dignity. The girl urgently needs to report that such a martial arts expert has appeared among the mercenaries. It was about the main character, but he wasn't going to admit it. Instead, he only smiled and agreed with the student's words. And so the boys went to the base of the Dragon Defenders. It was still late at night. Soon it was time to say goodbye. Lin Mu said goodbye to his friend and quickly left, as he still had unfinished business. As soon as the black-haired kid stepped outside, he immediately hailed a cab. A young boy urgently needed to get to Pingjiang District. There were urgent matters waiting for him there. As soon as the driver received the order, he immediately went to the desired location requested by the customer. When the car arrived at the right place, the guy paid and asked the driver to wait, saying he would pick up the clothes and come right back. Immediately afterward, the black-haired kid got out of the car and walked away in an unknown direction. Since the customer was not around, the driver allowed himself to smoke a cigarette, hoping to finish before our hero returned. The man waited quietly in the car. It was dark outside and only the headlights illuminated the road. The cigarette slowly smoldered as the driver was immersed in his thoughts. I wonder what he was thinking about now. After a while, the young boy returned to the car and asked the driver to open the trunk to put clothes in there. The driver agrees to open the trunk without too many questions, because after all, it's his job. As soon as the driver pressed one of the buttons on the panel, the trunk opened immediately. The protagonist walked around the car and quickly threw into the trunk the very bags of money he had taken earlier, under the pretense that they were clothes. The driver glanced at his customer and couldn't help but notice that the guy looked very pleased after picking up the clothes. The bags contained about 10 million euros. Naturally, the young man looked pleased. But it was a mystery to the driver. Meanwhile, that very boss Wang had the results of the body check come back to him. One of his subordinates brought him an envelope. The man held out an envelope to his boss. Inside were the results of the examination. The subordinate states that the results say that the man's body is fine and he wasn't poisoned or anything like that. In the end, the man gives his verdict that the boss is completely healthy and has no problem with it. Hearing this verdict, the thug asks the subordinate to leave. Now the man wants to be alone with himself. The man's face flushes with anger and rage as he thinks about the fact that our hero might have just outsmarted him. What if he hadn't actually poisoned him? Suddenly, the man is pulled out of his thoughts by a phone call. When the creep looks at the screen, he realizes it's a call from an unknown caller. Who is it? The man looked very serious and worried, but he answered the phone. Who's on the other end? As it turned out, he received a call from none other than Lin Mu. That made the scumbag laugh. The protagonist has already booked a table in one restaurant and invited Wang's boss there. He wants to have a little chat with him. The man didn't seem to mind that at all, and very quickly agreed to come to meet him in a couple minutes. Even though he looked relaxed, his mind was churning with thoughts. He was nervous and didn't understand what else the protagonist wanted from him. A few minutes pass, and the old man is already arriving at the right restaurant. He didn't want to keep the young boy waiting. The man did not hesitate and got straight to the point. He wanted to know what the black-haired boy wanted from him. The bastard is ready to do whatever he wants. The young man was slightly amused at this reaction from the scumbag, but continued nonetheless. He had one request. The protagonist continued, and immediately said that the man should know about his family's situation, and he has one task that only Boss Wang can accomplish. After saying that, he filled his glass with wine. Hearing this, the man seemed to be more than a little interested. He was looking forward to hearing this assignment. The black-haired kid explained the situation. He had some cash, but unfortunately he couldn't really use it yet, and since the man is in business, he can probably bail out our hero in such a difficult situation. Boss Wang had no problem agreeing. Although he has few useful skills, but business is one of his strengths. Immediately after that, the man moved on to the question of money and its amount. He was very interested to know how much money our hero had on his hands. Lin Mu had 20 million euros. He instructed the man to turn that amount into an even larger sum, no matter what the means. Boss Wang will have no problem doing this, so the protagonist only has to rest and wait. In that case, our hero thanks the man in advance and raises his glass to him. Boss Wang raises his glass too, and pulls it towards the guy's glass to clink and seal their deal. Some time passes. The weather is clear outside. The black-haired boy has returned to the dormitory. A young man sits at his desk doing something on his laptop, while his roommates walk around. Lin Mu can't concentrate in this environment, as there are too many extra eyes, so he decides to leave. It is for this reason that the protagonist decides to look at places with arenas and seems to find a pretty good one. After that, the young lad urgently needed to go and check something out. Our hero went outside and came up to some nice building. It looked quite expensive and caught his eye at once, and so, the young man is already standing in front of the entrance of the building and hopes that the owner will turn out to be a nice person. A moment later, the young boy presses the bell, without doubt or hesitation. A melody sounds. A voice is heard inside the house. It seems that someone is about to come outside. After only a couple seconds, the door of the mansion swings open. A young kid with glasses comes outside and looks at Lin Mu in surprise, asking who he is looking for. The main character got straight to the point. He saw in the advertisement that this house was for rent, so he came here. The young lad was immediately filled with seriousness when he realized that the young man in front of him was possibly his future client. The young lad was interested in the monthly rent for such a nice house. The boy first invited them to come inside and look around, and then they could discuss the price in peace. A moment later, our hero put on his slippers and entered the house. It was quite spacious and cozy. The boy finally introduced himself. His name is Meng Xuan, and he inquired about our hero's name. The black-haired kid kindly introduced himself and gave his name, Lin Mu. Meng Xuan began a tour of the house. There were already 2 people living on the top floor, and now there was just 1 vacant room left. The guy led the protagonist to a vacant room. It was well furnished and cost $1,200 a month. Lin Mu must pay the amount for the whole year at once. The young lad started to get a little indignant, saying it was a little overpriced for just 1 room. The man objected, saying that there were rooms nearby that only cost a few hundred a month, and if Lin Mu wasn't satisfied with something, he could go there. Suddenly, a pleasant female voice was heard from the corridor. A moment later, a woman entered the room and immediately recognized Lin Mu as the guest. The black-haired boy was surprised to see Miss Song here. It was his instructor at the university. The man with glasses looked over at the guys and was slightly surprised that they seemed to already know each other. The woman confirmed this fact and added that Lin Mu was her student from the university. The young lad immediately realized that it would be difficult to do anything when Miss Song was around. That was the problem. That was why the young man refused to rent the room, saying that the price was too high. Having said that, he headed away. The woman wondered why the young man couldn't rent the room, given his family's wealth. Thoughts began to creep into the woman's head that perhaps something had happened to the kid's family. In the meantime, the young boy still managed to rent his own place. Our hero isn't really a big fan of Western style, but it's not the worst option it could be. The black-haired kid looks around carefully and realizes that this is indeed a good place to cultivate, as it's calm and quiet. Then the young man's gaze slides to the spacious kitchen, which is imposing to him. A small smile appears on Lin Mu's face at the realization that it had been quite a while since he had cooked for himself. And so the young man decides to fix it. So after a while, the pan is already frying odorous vegetables and meat. Lin Mu can cook well, but unfortunately this time he was unlucky with the ingredients. Next time he will order them online. The protagonist immediately went online and decided to look up some herbs for future meals in the meantime. Suddenly he came to a shock at what he had just seen on his screen. On the screen was a picture of some kind of plant. It looked more like someone's root, and it's called spiritual ginseng. The young man genuinely did not expect to see such a thing. After all, it was a 300-year-old spiritual ginseng that suited him perfectly. This product is located in Nangu City, which means that Lin Mu will have to personally go to pick it up. A young boy has already arrived at the airport, because very soon was his flight. He has to fly to another city. The protagonist was already on his way to the airplane, to which a special corridor led. In fact, the young man was incredibly curious about what it would be like to fly an airplane, because he had not had that experience before. But before getting on board, one naturally needs to take a look at which seat Lin Mu is sitting in. The protagonist pulled his phone out of his pocket and opened the ticket, checking the information. The corners of his lips lifted in a smile, realizing that having an entire company behind him was great. Boss Wang had prepared a plane and everything for him. Meanwhile, on the airplane, on one of the seats was a pretty girl Hao Yue from Luobi Yun Corporation. There were quite a few people on the plane, mostly men. But soon our hero came on board, walking between the rows and looking for his seat. The girl was surprised that another person had come aboard, for she thought they had the whole airplane to themselves. The man explained that before boarding, the airline informed him that they needed a VIP seat. Hearing this, the girl was greatly surprised, because if it was a VIP passenger, he must be an influential person. Now the girl wondered how powerful and important this man was, after all, if he was put on the plane with them like this. When the black-haired boy passed by the girl, he smiled warmly and said hello in a friendly manner. After a moment, he finally found the right seat on the airplane and took it. Why, to pass the time, the young man began to study the screen panel that was on the back of the seat. At this time, the pretty girl was scrutinizing him with her gaze, trying to catch every detail. If the girl is not happy with this intruder, the man is willing to talk to the airline and resolve the issue. But she refuses. With a smile on her face, the girl remarks that compared to the rest of the VIP clients, there is something interesting about this guy. Some time passes and the plane finally lands. The flight is over and has passed without incident. Our hero has gone about his business. The girl and her subordinates had also just gotten off the plane. The girl was slightly upset that this guy just walked away and didn't even speak to her. The subordinate seemed to notice this and wanted to somehow support the girl and reassure her. But she assured him that everything was fine. It was just her first time going through such an experience. Meanwhile, in another part of town, an auction is taking place. The next item is a very special plant. This plant has been identified by botanists and evaluated by professionals. It has many useful qualities. And the starting price of such an unusual and special product is $15,000. The black-haired kid is surprised that the price of such a valuable ginseng is so small. No one here seems to understand its value. A moment later, those present in the room began to raise their bets. And at this point, the maximum bet was $22,000. Our hero did not wait long and immediately raised the bid to $44,000 to definitely buy this lot. The auctioneer immediately began counting down, waiting to see if anyone else in the room would raise a bid. But finally the man finished counting down, and the bid was not outbid. It turns out that Lin Mu had bought this special plant. This unusual plant has finally found its owner. It has been sold to the protagonist. The young lad was incredibly excited about his purchase, as he wanted it so badly. The bronze cauldron should be here by the time Lin Mu returned. Finally, the day began to come to an end. People in a fancy restaurant gathered for a dinner party. The evening promised to be wonderful. The girl saw her acquaintance, Miss Lee, and asked her to come over. After a moment, the girl held out a glass of wine to her acquaintance and asked her to hold it for her. The black-haired girl is surprised and doesn't understand where Miss Lowe is going, because the banquet isn't over yet. Miss Lowe reports that she just wants to go outside to ventilate and get some fresh air. And so, as soon as the girl was outside, she got into the car. Finally, she felt free. But even though the girl had already left the banquet hall and was on her own in the car, she wasn't entirely comfortable. And that's because her bodyguards were following her. Sure, it's for her safety, but having 5 special forces is a bit much. It didn't seem to bother the girl much, for she had a great idea in her head. Miss Lowe decided it would be a good idea to throw her bodyguards off her tail while she still had the chance. The subordinates, as soon as they saw the girl begin to pick up speed, rushed after her. They couldn't lose her, and so the real chase began between them. The girl drove as hard as she could, but the bodyguards didn't lag behind at all. When the girl realized that her plan didn't work, she didn't despair, for she had another thought in her head. At this time, a bright red color appeared on the traffic light, and a road sign with an arrow signifying a turn was hanging nearby. Seeing such a swanky opportunity, the girl quickly swerved while her bodyguard's car stopped at a stoplight. The subordinates missed the rebel girl because their traffic light was now red, and they couldn't violate traffic laws. The girl was overjoyed when she realized that she was now 100% free, because she had left her bodyguards behind. Immediately afterward, she began to contemplate what she would do while no one was watching her. But all of a sudden, some strange guy ran right into the road. Where the hell did he come from? Miss Luo hit the brake sharply to avoid hurting that strange guy and running him over. Moments later, a bullet flies right next to the girl's face. It almost hits her in the head. It was a real gunshot. The car window was punctured. Thankfully, the girl was lucky and wasn't hurt badly. She instantly got out of the car to look around. If Miss Lowe had stopped even a second later, it's scary to imagine what might have happened. She decides to hide somewhere safe until the bodyguards can find and rescue her. The girl quickly runs down the empty hallway, hoping to get away from her abusers as soon as possible. At last, Miss Lowe dared to stop, for she was already very tired from running. She would be safe here for a while. Suddenly, the young girl hears someone's footsteps. It makes her a little nervous. But after a moment, the girl calms down, because these footsteps are quite calm, which means that it is an ordinary passerby. A couple seconds later, the girl sees a lone kid walking down the street. After a moment, the girl recognizes in this passerby the very guy with whom they had previously flown on the same plane. Suddenly, the girl grabbed the black-haired boy's arm, after which she asked him to stop. The protagonist naturally stopped and wondered what this stranger wanted from him. The black-haired guy thought that this girl was offering him prostitution services, so he immediately refused, because now he did not need it. The young girl was greatly surprised to hear of any favors. Miss Lowe looked at her clothes and was greatly surprised, for she realized who this stranger had taken her for. The young boy heads away, but the girl has no intention of letting him go and screams again, asking him to stop. The protagonist turns around and looks questioningly at the girl, wondering what else she needs. The girl says that the young man is wrong, and explains the situation about a killer hunting her. She desperately asks for help. When the young man hears about this, he immediately volunteers to help. He helps Miss Lowe to the police station. It was a deep night. Millions of stars spread across the night sky, and the full moon illuminated the city. And so, after a while, the boys saw a police station. To get there, all they had to do was cross the road. Finally, the guys come up to the police station. The girl needs to get inside as soon as possible and stay there. A tense atmosphere hung between the boys. They walked in complete silence. The black-haired boy seemed to sense this tension and shifted his gaze to the girl. The protagonist feels the girl's hard stare on him, so he assumes that she needs something from him again. The girl is very embarrassed and crumpled, but eventually asks if he really didn't recognize her. The young guy replies seriously that he doesn't recall her. He's in a big hurry to go about his business. It seems that the young man really didn't recognize the girl. He didn't seem to really want to see her and wanted to leave as soon as possible. She can't tell the police about today's attack because someone in her family will deal with it. She needs to find a place to hide. The girl is very embarrassed. Since he doesn't recognize her, it's understandable why he wants to leave as soon as possible. She finds a way out. The girl asks to buy her food because she has no money now. Then she will return it all. The main character seems to calm down easily when he hears such a request. He feels sorry for the girl. He agrees, but warns that she'd better go home or to the police station, as it's not safe here this late at night. Some time passes and the guys come to our hero's house, which he rents. The girl is surprised, assuming there is some kind of restaurant somewhere nearby. Well, it didn't turn out that way. In fact, our hero brought her to his house to feed her and cook dinner. Naturally, the girl doesn't think this guy is a bad person, but it seems a bit much for her. Moments later, the boys come to the entrance of the young lad's house. Then they go inside, and the girl looks around, noting that the owner of the house has pretty good taste. After a couple minutes, the young girl sat down on a chair and waited. The young girl seemed a little nervous. Apparently, she had been walking in such high heels all day. Lin Mu noticed this and immediately realized that her legs must be hurting a lot, but she didn't complain about it. Seeing this, the young boy turns around and leaves the room, saying he'll be back soon. After a while, the main character returns to the room again, and the girl is shocked at what he has brought with him. It turns out that the young man brought her a basin of warm water for her to hold her feet in. That should make her feel better. Finally, the girl dipped her sore feet into the warm water. It relaxed her immediately. After a moment, the girl realized that she had forgotten to introduce herself. She corrected herself and said her name, Luo Bing Yun. The black-haired kid smiled friendly and introduced himself in return. The young man tells the girl to rest, and in the meantime he will get busy cooking dinner. The young man seems to think she's usually a girl. It's pretty great to know someone as caring as Lin Mu. The main character had already finished cooking dinner and saw the girl's hungry look. She must be very hungry. The young girl immediately started making excuses and saying that it wasn't so she wouldn't look like a glutton. Turns out the black-haired kid even made slippers for her. It was very nice and thoughtful of him, so the girl appreciated the kind gesture. The young lad didn't think much about what he cooked and did what first came to mind. The girl assured him that everything is very tasty and appetizing looking. She is glad for such a show of care. The black-haired boy laughed sweetly, for he was pleased to hear such warm words to his address. The young girl chewed leisurely and wondered again if our hero really didn't remember her. But unfortunately, the young man really couldn't remember where he had seen Miss Luo before. Then, Miss Luo decides to give the guy a little hint and hints that they met in Nangu City on an airplane. Hearing these words, the young man immediately remembers that he has seen this face before. The young girl was greatly surprised that our hero was so forgetful, for she had not changed much since that time. Then the protagonist has a question. Why then was this defenseless girl being pursued by someone? The girl herself does not know the reason for this, but assumes that it is because of some problems and conflicts at work. After hearing this, Lin Mu is no longer going to ask the girl about it, for she must be uncomfortable. The young man tells Miss Luo to finish her meal, and after that they'll deal with the girl's sore leg. A couple minutes after the boys had eaten, our hero began to examine his guest's leg. He carefully and gently began rubbing the girl's leg. The redness was visible on it. The leg was a little swollen. When the young man rubbed the girl's leg so gently, it embarrassed her very much. A strong blush appeared on her cheeks. When the black-haired boy finished examining the girl's leg, he concluded that it was a simple sprain. But the problem was that this sprain was right on the girl's leg, which made things difficult. If there was no way to help her leg now, it would seriously affect her walking. Lin Mu could help her, but it would be painful. The young girl agreed to accept help from the kid and prepared herself for the pain, squeezing her eyes shut hard. But after a moment, the guy had already finished his work, and Miss Luo didn't even feel anything. It felt like Lin Mu was a real doctor. The black-haired kid immediately started denying it, since he's still a student. That's just more impressive. Moments later, the girl asks the protagonist for permission to occupy his bathroom because she can't go home like this. The young lad is naturally okay with this, but asks Miss Lowe to wait a bit before doing so. The young man is going to bring the girl clean clothes to change into after her shower. Since our hero lives alone, he has no women's clothes, so he holds out clean clothes to his guest. The young girl was overjoyed that the young lad was so kind to her and agreed to help her. And so, before long, Miss Lowe headed for the shower. The black-haired boy left his slippers by the door so the girl wouldn't slip later. When the protagonist gave all the things to the girl, he went to another room, leaving Miss Lowe by herself. And so, when the young man entered the living room, he immediately began to ponder about the spiritual ginseng he had acquired today. But before using this miracle plant, our hero has to figure out how to use it. After a couple minutes, a knock was heard in the living room. It seemed to be the girl who had finished taking a shower. The girl had indeed already finished and changed into the shirt her boyfriend had given her. When the black-haired boy saw her in the shirt, he could not take his eyes off because the girl really suited her. She thanked him and started to approach as she suddenly saw a box of ginseng on the table and wondered what it was. The young boy immediately explained that it was a medicinal herb from which he was going to make a medicine in the future. The girl was surprised when she heard that it was a medicinal herb. Did our hero really have some health problems? The young boy talked about how he has had a very weak body since he was a child, so he has lived on medication all his life. The girl said she knew some pretty good doctors and could recommend them to the guy for counseling. The guy politely refuses, saying that Chinese medicine will only make things worse, and Western doctors won't help here. The young boy says it's pretty late and not safe to get home alone, so he suggests she spend the night here in the guest room. The girl immediately agrees without hesitating for a second. She heads to the guest room and wishes the guy a good night. And so in such a friendly atmosphere they wish each other good night, after which they go to bed. And so the night flew by. Night changed to morning. Dawn came. The sun slowly peeked out from behind the horizon. The young boy had just woken up and came out of his room. The slippers that stood against the wall caught his eye. There were 2 pairs of slippers here instead of 1. Because of this, the main character thought that the girl must have already left without saying anything or saying goodbye. Suddenly our hero heard a pleasant odor, but did not understand where it was coming from. When the young man entered the kitchen, he saw many dishes on the table that felt like they had been cooked recently. These dishes looked quite expensive, and there was a note beside one of them. As it turned out, these dishes were prepared by Miss Lowe. She had some business to attend to, so she left so early. Her phone number was written at the end of the note. The protagonist was very pleased to receive such a gift in the morning, and he was truly grateful. The black-haired boy sat down at the table and immediately began to taste the delicious-smelling food. As soon as the young man took a bite, he came to marvel at how delicious it was. The young lad had no idea that the girl was so good at cooking, and so right after the meal, our hero decided to waste no time and get busy creating the right medicine. The black-haired boy reached into a cupboard and pulled out the right cauldron. Moments later, the protagonist chopped up the desired plant and placed the cauldron of water on the stove, waiting for the water in it to start boiling. And so, when the water finally began to boil, the young lad added ginseng to it. Our hero can easily cope with this task, because you only need to boil on low heat. Meanwhile, in Manhattan, all the houses shone brightly. No one was asleep. Some man was shouting loudly that his daughter had almost been killed. He was seriously reprimanding his subordinates, for it was their fault. The subordinates stood in front of their boss and felt incredibly ashamed for failing to protect his daughter. They realized their guilt. But luckily, the subordinates had already found the killer and the man behind it all. The boy handed his boss an envelope with the information. That was good, of course, but the man was more interested in who had helped his daughter. Luckily, the subordinates even had that information. The man carefully took a combination of information about the one who saved his daughter, that is, our hero. The man came to a shock when he read that the main character once died, but came back to life. The subordinates assured the boss that this information was accurate, because they got it straight from the hospital. After our hero woke up, he became taller and his appearance changed. As it turned out, his personality had also changed. The hospital told them that this was the first time such a miracle had ever happened in the history of medicine, and it couldn't help but surprise them. After a moment, the kid speculated that it might have something to do with Lin Mu losing his memory. Bing Yun's father couldn't understand how this kid met his daughter, or where it was even. 5 days ago they flew on the same plane, and then met on the day the girl was attacked. This time the boss had forgiven his subordinates for such an oversight, but it must not happen again from now on. And so, when the subordinates received their boss's forgiveness, they headed away from his office. Finally, the man was left to himself. All he could think about now was this incident, and Lin Mu who had saved his daughter. Meanwhile, Lin Mu sat in his home and rested. By this time it was late evening, and our hero went to the stove to see if his medicine was cooked. Luckily, the medicine was already prepared, and it seems to have been prepared correctly. The young lad began to pour the liquid into the crock, and as soon as he did, it immediately solidified. The protagonist has to do everything with his hands, as he has no key in this world. He started twisting the ball. After a while, the young man made many such balls. Now everything was ready. Finally, it was time to try it. Our hero did not boldly put the pill to his mouth. The black-haired boy closes his eyes, trying to feel if something is about to happen to him. It seems to have worked. Although the effect is a little weak, the quantity makes up for it. The protagonist is happy, because he realizes that with such large finances, nothing and no one will prevent him from rising to the top. Thus the next day came. Our hero went to the university. The auditorium is filled with students. Black-haired kid sitting outside Tanbei Bay doing something on his phone. As it turned out, the protagonist was checking the grade he got on his last exam. The girl noticed that his grades hadn't gone up much after he'd lost his memory, and was laid up in the hospital. She made a joke about wanting to fall off the balcony, and it made the young lad uncomfortable. A bitch on the other row remarked that after that incident, everyone around them was just talking about how handsome Lin Mu had become. The brunette Lee snorted unhappily and told her friend to ignore it, because it was none of their business at all. The bitch reminds us that they're still engaged, which means our hero is her fiancé. He's also always hanging out with Tanbei Bay. The girl irritably replied that she absolutely didn't care about those papers and wasn't going to waste her time on it. The weather outside the window was beautiful. The sun was shining all around. A fancy and expensive car was parked in the parking lot outside the university. Who did it belong to? The red car obviously stood out among all the others because it looked more expensive and luxurious. There was a girl in it. As it turned out, it was none other than Miss Lowe. She looked absolutely stunning. Unexpectedly, one of the classmates informed our hero that someone is looking for him. Moments later, a girl enters the auditorium and approaches the black-haired kid who didn't expect to see her here. The young girl is cute, smiling and giggling, since she gave him such a little surprise. The young lad doesn't understand how the girl knew that this is where he is. The girl unhappily recalled that our hero never called her back, so she had to look for him on her own. The main character got embarrassed and said that he had been busy the last few days, so he had completely forgotten about her. The girl is a little annoyed and points out that the young man didn't look busy when he was chatting with his girlfriend. The black-haired kid started making excuses that they had just gotten out of class and were discussing it. The girl didn't want to hear it. Instead, she suggested that the guy go out to dinner at her expense. She took the initiative as well. The young man politely refused her, because today is his grandfather's birthday, and he is obliged to be home. It is his 80th birthday. But the girl was not upset at all when she heard about this news. Instead, she wanted to go with her boyfriend. It wasn't the best idea because our hero's family is a bit odd, and might not like her. Miss Lowe didn't seem to care at all, as she kept asking to visit him. They say it's not a problem for her. After a couple minutes of such entreaties, the protagonist agreed, but he must have one more class first. The young girl agreed to wait for him and walked out of the auditorium. The young lad circled back and was pleased that no one seemed to pay much attention to it, but he was only imagining it, because everyone around him was already whispering about Lin Mu having a girlfriend and such. Our hero quickly ran out of the classroom, hopefully avoiding these rumors while the other students whispered and shouted after him. Fortunately, the young man managed to escape from the classroom, and now he won't have to explain this situation to others. But suddenly, his girlfriend approaches the kid and asks him to explain everything that just happened. The young man answers honestly about only seeing that girl twice, and the rumors are lies. The protagonist told his girlfriend everything from beginning to end, from the airplane to the assault. Even if that was the case, why did this girl come to his university if they hadn't seen each other only twice? Maybe she'll thank him by marrying him too. The black-haired kid immediately began to deny it, because she is from a rich family and there is no way she will marry him. But Tanbei Bay is not relenting. Why then did Miss Luo act so friendly, and the young man even agreed to take her into his home? The young boy couldn't understand why it bothered his girlfriend so much. The student got embarrassed and started to justify that she was worried, because beautiful girls are very skillful at lying. The protagonist reassured the student and said that Miss Lowe couldn't fool him, and her friend was only worrying for nothing. Moments later, the young boy heads away to the auditorium, for class is about to begin. The girlfriend runs after him, keeps asking a million questions that never get answered. The day is slowly coming to an end, and a warm evening is coming. There are still students at the university. The auditorium is filled with students sitting in their seats, minding their own business. Suddenly, the girl slams the table loudly, getting her friend's attention. The girl Yara was discussing the fact that some stranger had just approached our hero, and said she was going to come to his grandfather's birthday party. But the brunette didn't seem to care at all about where and by whom the protagonist would spend his time. Her friend was greatly surprised at such indifference. Some girl would come to visit her fiancé and she wouldn't even do anything. This did not concern the girl at all, for they were going to break off the engagement soon anyway. The girlfriend starts to object because they haven't broken off the engagement yet, and it looks like a spit in her face. The girl tried to distract her friends from this and said that the teacher would be here soon, and they should close this topic and sit back down. Several hours passed and classes finally came to an end. Tired students streamed out of the university. The young lad had also already left the university and was heading out on his own, but he heard a car horn. A gorgeous red car, driven by a girl, stopped right in front of the young man. It was Miss Lowe. She asked if our hero had the skills to drive a car. The black-haired boy smiled and nodded immediately. She invited the young man to drive, for she did not know where his grandfather lived. It would be easier if he drove her. The young boy got behind the wheel without further ado, and moments later the car started. The boys were calmly heading toward their destination, and the girl leaned forward. The young girl touched herself on her leg, in the place where she had sprained it last time. The main character noticed it immediately, and thought that her leg was still hurting. The girl immediately calmed him down, and assured him that everything was fine. She just has a little soreness from the heels. The girl refuses to wear regular shoes because her legs look much longer and prettier in heels. The black-haired kid confessed that he doesn't understand girls at all. Why do you have to work so hard for beauty? The young girl smiles sweetly and explains that she wouldn't wear those heels on a normal day. But today is an exception. The young boy fell silent when he heard this. In fact, he didn't understand anything and decided to keep silent. Some time passes and the guys finally arrive at our hero's mansion, near which many cars are already parked. An elderly man comes out of the room and meets a black-haired kid. He seems glad to have him back. The protagonist kindly greets his uncle. After a moment, the man has a very logical question. Who is that girl next to the guy? The protagonist immediately introduces his girlfriend, explaining that he took her to his grandfather's birthday party. Hearing this, the man kindly invites the girl to come inside. Suddenly, the black-haired boy thought about something and looked up. The young man looked straight up at the roof of the building, before shifting his gaze to the balconies. Miss Luo looked at Lin Mu when she saw that he'd stopped. She was worried that he had something wrong. The young lad immediately came to his senses and assured her that everything was fine, then invited her inside. As soon as the guys went inside, they were immersed in a completely different atmosphere. The place was full of people who were lively chatting with each other. The young girl looked around carefully and noticed that Lin Mu had a rather large house. The two relatives of our hero looked at Miss Lowe attentively and gazed into her face, for the girl reminded them of someone. Unexpectedly, one of the guests shouted out loudly when he found out that this girl was the Luo family's Miss Luo. The bearded man was immediately surprised when he heard about it, because he didn't understand how the protagonist and her could meet. Our hero's fiancée was also at this party, and she was looking intently at the unexpected guest. In the man's mind, there was a suggestion that the Lowe family was planning to help the black-haired boy. The bearded man is worried that all his hard work will go down the drain, all because the Lowe family will interfere. Auntie immediately greeted the young lad as soon as he entered the room. The woman inquired why the protagonist arrived home so late. Lin Mu instantly explained that he had classes at the university and came as quickly as he could. The woman began to greet their guest graciously, for she realized how much status this young lady had. They were glad to see her here. The young girl asked not to communicate so formally, for she came here as an ordinary friend of our hero. Regardless of the girl's reasons for showing up here, their family is immensely pleased by her presence at such an event. The black-haired boy wanted to see his grandfather as soon as possible, for he had never met him before today. The aunt realizes that the young man can't remember anything after the hospital, so she explains that his grandfather has Alzheimer's and is now in his office upstairs. Hearing this, the young boy decides to head upstairs to see his grandfather. Miss Lowe goes with him. As soon as the guys leave, the bearded man immediately turns to the woman and asks what she was able to find out. Unfortunately, nothing could be found out, because this girl is not as easy as it seems, because you can't find any information on her. No one knew what connects this girl with the main character, but one thing they knew for sure. The guys are not in a relationship. The bearded man is greatly angered and disappointed by this, for now it will be harder for them to do anything. At this time, the young boy had already gone up to his grandfather's office. There was an employee in the office who was looking after him. Just as the boys entered the office, the nurse was busy spoon-feeding the elderly man, because he couldn't do it himself. Grandpa's gaze was fixed on one point. It seemed as if he didn't care about any of this. Suddenly, the elderly man grabbed the caregiver's wrist as she put a spoon in his mouth. The black-haired woman turned around and looked at our hero with a questioning look, as if asking what she should do. After a moment, the young boy allowed the woman to leave, for he wanted to talk to his grandfather in person. The nurse obediently complied with the request and left the office without further questions. After that, the main character walked over to his grandfather and sat down in front of him, wishing him a happy birthday. The young boy took his grandfather's hands in the hope that he would remember him. The elderly man looked very tired, but still managed to pronounce our hero's name. Moments later, Grandpa was also approached by Miss Lowe, who wished him a long life with a warm smile. The black-haired kid immediately explains that this girl is his girlfriend, whom he took with him to help celebrate her birthday. The elderly man didn't seem to mind it at all. On the contrary, he only smiled warmly. When our hero was about to pull back a little and remove his hand, his grandfather grabbed him tightly, preventing him from doing so. The young boy looked at his grandfather, who held his hand tightly and didn't want to let go. At this time, a servant entered the study and announced that the celebration was about to begin, so we should hurry up. The protagonist headed downstairs to scout out the situation, leaving Miss Lowe to keep an eye on her grandfather. Waiting for him at the bottom was Xiao Yue, who had been standing here for quite some time. The black-haired kid didn't understand the purpose of her coming to this event. Her grandfather has instructed her to be here to represent their family. She is also to present a gift. Moments later, the girl's subordinate drops off the gift that Xiao Yue's family has prepared for our hero's grandfather. As a gift, the Xiao Yue family prepared a gorgeous flower-painted vase from the Yongzhen period. It's very precious. As soon as they showed this vase, everyone present began to whisper and marvel at such a luxurious gift. The young lad politely tried to refuse the gift, for it was very expensive. The brunette reminded him that she was still his legal bride, so in the right to give such gifts. The young lad laughed at the fact that she started talking about engagement. She reminded me again that the engagement is their family's business, but she's still the official bride, so she has to give her future grandfather a gift. The protagonist looks at the girl with indifference, realizing that he has made a mistake. Our hero should have broken off the engagement earlier. Then Xiao Yue wouldn't have had to come to the event. Upon hearing such news, everyone present began to whisper. No one understood why they wanted to break off the engagement. Auntie also heard about it, so she immediately went over to her nephew to find out the reason for it. Lin Mu explained that Xiao Yue thought he was a loser, which was why the young man had decided to break off the engagement. But since the girl's grandfather is against it, our hero decides to personally talk to him. The black-haired girl looks seriously at the young boy, whose voice is filled with determination. Moments later, Miss Lowe, who as it turns out has also prepared a gift for his grandfather, enters the conversation. It seems very awkward for our hero to accept such expensive gifts, but the girl holds out a small box. But our hero has no choice but to accept this gift. I wonder what is in the box. The young girl smiles sweetly. She can't wait to see the guy's reaction when he opens the box. A moment later, the black-haired boy opens the box and sees a beautiful wide ring there. A young boy is greatly surprised when he sees such a gift. At first he is stunned. The girl adds that this ring is made of the best jade, Kai Wei Yang. The brunette agrees that the jade is really not bad, but they also can't be sure that the ring is real. The young girl praises Xiao Yue's sharp eyesight, as she was able to determine the quality of the jade so easily. Since it's made of the finest jade, it's probably the real thing. No one would dare to deceive the Luo family. And since Miss Lowe said so, the girl puts all doubts aside. Soon she congratulates our hero's grandfather on such an incredible gift. The black-haired boy smiled sweetly and slipped the box to his inside jacket pocket, then thanked the girl. Guy accepts the gift of the Du family on behalf of his grandfather. He promises that he will come next time to talk about breaking off the engagement. The black-haired girl does not respond to this in any way, but only looks at our hero seriously. Suddenly his aunt enters the conversation, saying that Lin Mu can't do such a reckless thing because the engagement is his grandfather's decision. But the young boy keeps standing his ground. None of the guys want this engagement, so we should just break it off. Hearing such seriousness and determination in her nephew's voice, she stops arguing and agrees with him. A few more hours pass, and finally the birthday party comes to an end. The girl takes note of Xiao Yue's incredible beauty and asks if the protagonist will have any regrets after breaking his engagement to such a beauty. But the young man doesn't care at all. Since the girl doesn't want to waste her time on him, her beauty and intelligence don't matter. The girl tries to change our hero's mind, but all to no avail. He's not going to marry the girl. He is not the kind of man who will pursue something that does not belong to him, leaving behind what is at his fingertips. The young girl picks up on our hero's eloquence, and it amuses her. Some time passes and finally the guys arrive on the scene. The young kid immediately gets out of the car and dials something on his cell phone. Moments later, the phone rings. As it turns out, the black-haired guy gives the girl his phone number and asks her to call if she needs help. The young girl is happy about such a step on the part of the protagonist, so she smiles sweetly and says goodbye to him. Moments later, Miss Lowe quickly leaves on her own business, leaving our hero alone. After that, the black-haired kid digs into the inside pocket of his jacket and searches for something. He reads a note from his grandfather. Turns out his grandfather doesn't have Alzheimer's. He acts this way because he doesn't want to mess with his relatives who have been fighting over the inheritance all these years. A young boy with sadness in his eyes reads this note while a realization slowly comes to him. Thus came the next day. Our hero arrived at the Du family's resort where he had been invited. A black-haired kid walks up to a yacht, near which 2 guards stand and ask who it is and what he wants. The young boy quickly introduced himself and said that he had come here to talk to Grandpa Du. Hearing this, the guard informs the boss via a small microphone that our hero has come alone. Having received permission in the headphones, the guards kindly let our hero in, for an elderly master is already waiting for him. The young boy nods and thanks the guards profusely. Moments later, the protagonist slowly walks up the gangway to board the ship. The young man walks aboard the ship, where he sees people relaxing in the pool. Soon he notices his grandfather and greets him. The man then says hello back and asks what topic he wanted to talk to him about. The young girlfriend decides not to beat around the bush and immediately starts talking, asking if the grandfather is close to his granddaughter. The elderly man becomes nervous, for thinks something must have happened to his granddaughter. The young boy calms the grandfather down by explaining that the girl is not happy with their engagement. But the gray-haired old man does not take it seriously, because children tend to quarrel, and it is not worth paying attention to it. Our hero continues to stand his ground, saying that if Jiao Yue doesn't want it, he won't waste her time and suggests just breaking off the engagement. Suddenly, a man enters the conversation and tries to put our hero in his place, saying that he has no right to talk like that. But he is interrupted by an old man who shouts loudly and tells his subordinate to shut up. After that, a tense atmosphere hung in the air. Everyone fell silent when they saw Grandpa's anger. The gray-haired man once again questioned whether the protagonist really wanted to break the engagement. The young man once more repeated his wish for the breaking of the engagement. After that, they would be mere strangers to each other. Moments later, the man agrees to break the engagement. It seems it was easier than it seemed. The black-haired kid says he'll take the wine, and this moment will not waste any more of their time. After a few seconds, the young boy turns around and heads away, saying goodbye to everyone present. The mustachioed man doesn't understand why the master allowed this to happen so calmly and easily, as it could lead to rumors about their family. But it seems that said Vlasov man does not care at all about the opinion of society, because it is thanks to him that their family has become what it is now. The mustachioed man explained that the Luo family was much stronger than the Lin family, so it would be more advantageous to marry Xiao Yue off to someone from the Luo family. But since the engagement is already broken, they may not hide it. Some time passed, and the young lad went downtown on his own business. Unexpectedly, the young man saw a woman he knew. It was his instructor at the university, Miss Song. The young man was very surprised at their sudden meeting and immediately offered to help her with the packages. The woman didn't mind the help at all, and moments later handed the guy a heavy bag. Inside the transparent bag was a gift box, and our hero thought it was someone's birthday. The woman said it was her birthday, and she bought a cake to celebrate. But she will celebrate not alone, but with her neighbors. After a moment, the woman invited the protagonist to join them. The black-haired boy was greatly surprised at such an unexpected offer. Suddenly, someone called out to the woman. In front of them stood 3 men who were heading in their direction. The kid resented the woman celebrating her birthday in such a boring way and suggested she go along with him. But that didn't appeal to Miss Sleep at all, because she already had someone to celebrate with and politely declined. Then, the guy offers to bring a female friend along if she wants, and reminds her that birthdays are very important in Korea. But it doesn't work on the woman, because she's Chinese and doesn't care about Korean customs. Moments later, one of the guards blocks the woman's path, not reacting in any way to her refusal. Miss Son tries to find out what it all means, and why the guy won't let her go quietly. The blonde man doesn't answer, only chuckles quietly and smirks as he looks at the uncomprehending woman. The guy has been looking for Miss Son for a very long time, and he's angry that the woman can't just give him one chance. Blondie's not going to back down. He doesn't seem to understand the word no. He thinks the woman is dating this loser instead of him. But that has absolutely nothing to do with Lin Mu. The woman agrees that our hero is much better than that loser blonde guy. The guy rants about how much he cares about the girl, and reminds her that if it wasn't for him, she wouldn't be here right now. The blonde man then addresses the main character, saying that the girl will leave him as soon as she doesn't need him. Miss Sung starts to defend herself and yells back, informing her that everything this guy has said is nothing but slander. But the boy smiles smugly, thinking he's right. The girl is going to dump Lin Mu at some point anyway. The girl warns Li Guanjue one last time to shut up, or else he will regret everything he just said. But the lad doesn't take the girl's words seriously, because he's sure she can't beat him. Instead, He adds that he wants to touch her legs again. After a moment, the girl's patience runs out and she swings her leg at the guy with all her might, but he easily dodges the blow. The kid acts like he's mocking the girl and looking down on her. At this time, the black-haired kid was already surrounded by two of the scum's guards. Moments later, a bald guard starts a fight and swings his foot at the protagonist, deciding to finish him off quickly. But as we all remember, the young lad is not as easy as he looks. He keeps a close eye on the guard's punch. Due to his alertness, the young man easily dodges and strikes back at his assailant's face. The blow was so hard that the scumbag couldn't stand on his feet and collapsed to the ground. A couple seconds passed. Our hero had already switched to the second guard and showed him where he belonged. The young man easily overpowered the two men and knocked them to rest on the cold ground. The woman watching all this was greatly surprised and empathized with whether the young lad was injured. The black-haired boy smiles and says he's fine. He lies about how when he opened his eyes, the two men were already on the floor. Someone must have saved him. Why, the boys quietly go about their business, but the woman is still surprised, for she says she saw no one. But that doesn't matter now. The most important thing is that the young boy was left safe and sound. The bald man is still lying on the ground with no strength, but he lifts his head and wants to tell them who really did this to them. Our hero doesn't let that happen and steps on the man's foot, automatically gagging him. The woman wants to get out of here as soon as possible. Because of these scumbags, her mood is ruined. But the blonde man doesn't let it be that easy and stops them, because they just injured his subordinates. The woman gets on the defense and says it wasn't their fault, and if he wants revenge, he should find the professional who did it. Blondie doesn't care who did it. He wants to teach him a lesson. He says no one will save them this time. The black-haired boy focused and became more alert. He watched his opponent carefully. Miss Sohn tried to talk the protagonist out of it, since the blonde had won many competitions under Taekwondo. The blonde, in turn, on the contrary, encourages our hero to enter into battle with him and teases him, calling him a loser. The young lad must accept this cancer, for otherwise he will lose his dignity. Moments later, the protagonist stepped forward, ready to start a fight and see what this creep can do. The blonde is glad our hero has accepted his challenge. Now they'll find out who's stronger. The young man wants to get this over with as soon as possible and see if this creep's words match his abilities. And then a moment later, this badass quickly speeds up and heads for the young kid. After only a second, he jumps up high and swings his leg, ready to deliver the first blow. The woman watched anxiously as the fight quickly gained momentum. She was worried about our hero's health. The black-haired boy was as vigilant as possible, for he immediately realized that his opponent did not look like a weakling at all. The protagonist manages to dodge such a strong blow at the last second. If the enemy had hit, it would have been very bad. But the blonde is not going to give up at all, and in the next instant he prepares his second blow. A moment later, the opponent throws another leg kick, but our hero successfully blocks it. Blondin praises his opponent, as he was even able to block his turnaround kick. So what's the young lad going to do now? Does he have a plan? The woman anxiously watches this brutal fight, and worries greatly for our hero. Li Guanjui could calmly break through a board the size of a bowl, but then how could the protagonist survive such an attack? Lin Mu was perfectly fine. In fact, he didn't expect his opponent to be this good. The woman marvels that the young boy can withstand all these attacks with such courage. When did he get so fit? The enemy did not wait for our hero to recover, and a moment later jumped high to strike. The black-haired boy with all his courage is ready to take such a heavy blow. He gathers all his strength. Blondin notices his opponent has two hands ready at once and assumes he wants to grab his leg. The scumbag thinks he's figured out the protagonist, so he immediately comes up with another plan. And then, unexpectedly, the scoundrel changes his foot, preparing to strike with the other one. Our hero obviously didn't expect such a trap. The woman watching this tensed up a lot when she saw such an unexpected welcome from the guy. A moment later, the scoundrel took a swing of his leg with all his might, aiming it straight at the protagonist. But unfortunately for him, the plan failed, for the young lad sharply and strongly grabbed him by the leg he was about to attack. The protagonist was more serious than ever. Now he was going to teach his enemy a lesson. The black-haired boy squeezed his opponent's leg with such force that a loud crunch of bones was heard a moment later. A moment later, there was a piteous scream from a guy who was unable to contain such pain. Our hero pathetically gave him advice not to do something he wasn't good enough at, so as not to embarrass himself. He only made a fool of himself. Having said that, the guys headed away, leaving this loser alone lying on the ground and screaming in pain. The guys are going about their business and discussing what just happened. Miss Song did not expect this turn of events. It's hard to believe that a young lad has gotten so strong in just a couple months, but nevertheless, it's all true. The woman felt as if she was communicating with a completely different person. No matter how you looked at it, Lin Mu had become a better person. Afterwards, Miss Song adds that her neighbor is also pretty good at martial arts. The black-haired boy looked at the woman in surprise and realized that it was Zixi that Li Guangyu was talking about. It turns out that Zixi has been practicing since she was a child, so now she uses the sword as if it were an extension of her arm. Lin Mu wonders what such professionals do, but Miss Song doesn't know the answer to that question. Zixi leaves early in the morning and returns late at night. After a moment, the woman suggests that the young lad come inside and have some tea. Zixi is just home today. Unfortunately, the protagonist has to politely refuse such a tempting request, because he still has plenty of things to do. After a moment, the young boy turns around and walks away, before saying goodbye to the woman. The black-haired kid is calmly going about his business, as he suddenly hears shouting and requests for someone there to stop. When the young man turns around, he sees some stranger running away holding a bag. Someone shouts and calls him a thief. This stranger runs fast, skirting around crowds of people while being shouted after and asked to stop. The protagonist observes all this with curiosity, but decides not to interfere to avoid unnecessary problems. And then, moments later, a police car arrives on the scene and brakes sharply beside this thief. Soon a policewoman gets out of the car and shouts after the thief, telling him to stop because the police have arrived. But as expected, the stranger doesn't listen to anyone and keeps running, causing him to slip on something. He tried to jump the fence, but slipped and fell face first onto the pavement, dropping the stolen bag. At this time, the policewoman wasted no time and deftly jumped over the fence, catching up with the criminal. Resistance is futile. The thief is caught off guard and the policewoman is already preparing to apprehend him and take him to the station. But the man doesn't seem to adjust and isn't about to give up. He clenches his teeth irritably. Moments later, from his pocket, the stranger pulls out a knife, preparing to defend himself against the policewoman to the last. As long as he doesn't go to jail, this scumbag tries to stab the girl, but she deftly dodges, reminding him that assaulting a police officer is a serious offense. The thief continues to stand his ground, unwilling to give up. As long as he is free, he can do whatever he wants. If the thief voluntarily surrenders, the girl will turn a blind eye to the fact that he tried to attack her. The man still has a chance, but the man is adamant in his judgment. He picks up the bag from the ground and is about to confront the guardian of order. In such a case, the girl has no choice but to fulfill her honorable duty. A moment later, the girl headed straight for the thief, who started waving his knife around in a panic, in a pathetic attempt to defend himself. The policewoman is not going to listen to the thief's orders. She boldly approaches him and grabs his wrist with a knife in her hand. And in a couple of seconds, this scumbag is pinned to the pavement. He had a chance, but he didn't take it, so now he will be punished to the fullest. The policewoman had done her job, and now all she had to do was wait for backup. Suddenly, from behind, a stranger approached the policewoman, who had momentarily let her guard down and kicked her in the back. The young girl felt a sharp pain and immediately realized that something was wrong here. So after only a moment, she ducked and bounced away from the lying and immobilized thief. As it turned out, it was his accomplices who had come. Now there were 3 of them in total, and the policewoman was still alone. One of the badasses says that some things you have to turn a blind eye to, so the girl shouldn't have gotten involved. These mutts are about to leave, but the girl is not afraid. She can't just let them go because she's a police officer. One of the guys gets really annoyed by this, and he can no longer contain his emotions and quickly snaps. This scumbag runs up to the girl and throws a punch, but she dodges, causing her to lose her balance and almost fall. Because of this, the policewoman finds herself in a desperate situation. She has nowhere to dodge because she is pinned against the wall. A terrible thing could happen now because she's unarmed, and this scumbag has a knife. I think he's really going to kill her. Suddenly, someone's hand grabbed the bastard, which saved the unfortunate policewoman from being stabbed. As it turned out, it was our hero who asked the guys to forgive the policewoman, because all people make mistakes. The bald guy mulls it over and, for once, decides to forgive the policewoman, but warns her to stay out of other people's business. The young lad is very happy that these scumbags have finally gone and left them alone. But when the young man shifts his gaze to his hands, he sees the officer handcuffing them. What's the reason? The protagonist couldn't understand why the officer handcuffed him, but it's up to him to know what he's done. The black-haired kid doesn't understand why he was arrested after all. He was just saving a cop's life. But the girl does not believe at all that our hero is unfamiliar with these criminals. It's all too suspicious. The protagonist sees them for the first time, but the policewoman doesn't believe it. Why then did they listen to him so easily? The young lad explained that they couldn't have beaten his fight, so they decided to leave peacefully. The girl marveled that this stranger was capable of defeating 3 robbers. Now they would go to the station and write a report. Now it is very bad timing, because our hero has a lot of unfulfilled cases and asks to let him go. but the officer is adamant. By this time, another police car pulls up, and a police officer gets out. The man thinks the officer has already caught the robber and doesn't need help, but the girl explained that this was not a robber, and he should be taken to the station, as he might be an acquaintance of theirs. Upon hearing this, a police officer pushes the protagonist into a car and asks if Officer Wang will go back to the office. The girl explained that she unfortunately twisted her ankle, so she asks her coworker to give her a hand. The policeman immediately agrees to help his colleague, slams the car shut and runs up to the girl. A man helps his coworker to her car, noting that she is rather clumsy. They have a cute giggle. Suddenly the girl's eyes go wide with surprise. How is this even possible? When she looked inside the car, our hero was not there. Instead, there were only unbuttoned handcuffs on the seat. At this time, the young lad was going about his business with a quick stride, and the policewoman was still in a stupor. The black-haired boy had already regretted 1,000,000 times that he had intervened in this situation. He should have just walked on by. Suddenly someone called out to our hero. It turned out to be Miss Song, but the young man thought she should be home now. The woman forgot to buy some condiments, so she goes back to get them. She again invites the young man to take a walk together to introduce him to Zishi. In the end, the young boy has no choice but to agree. This way he can escape the police for a while. Some time passes, and Miss Song brings the black-haired boy to her house, where Zixi is already waiting for them. Zixi praised her friend for bringing such a fine young man to visit them. She inquired about his name. The other girl seemed to be a little softer. She asked Zixi to be less assertive so as not to scare our hero away. The young boy smiled sweetly and greeted the girls. The girls can't wait to meet the guest. Miss Song introduces the boy who is her student Lin Mu. Zixi assumes that this young man is the woman's favorite, since she deigns to invite him to her home. The woman explained that the black-haired kid had helped her teach Li Guangzhu a lesson, so she wanted to thank him with dinner. The brunette was worried when she heard that the scumbag was up to his bad deeds again. The bright girl immediately concluded that Lin Mu had some pretty good fighting skills, since he was able to teach a bad guy like Li Guangzhu a lesson. The young boy sat down next to the girl and said that he was still growing up to her fighting skills. The girl immediately realized that her friend had already told the kid about her fighting skills and abilities. Then the girl informs us that Meng Xuan is now gone abroad, so our hero can move in with the girls. The black-haired kid tries to politely decline, since he's already found a place to live. The girl keeps insisting. They say he can take the room downstairs and they will live upstairs, and if they need help, they will turn to the guy. Miss Song, who had heard their conversation, also joined in and started begging the young man. This way, they could help each other. In the end, the young lad could not resist for long and agreed to such a venture. But before they live together, they must discuss some rules. The second floor is for girls only, and it is forbidden to go in there without permission. The young man must clean up after himself. The boys will eat together, but the dishes will be washed by the boy. After a moment, it's a little stressful for the guy, because he doesn't realize if there will be many more of these rules. Some time passes and the brunette finishes her list of rules. Now they can celebrate. And before long, everyone is having fun and joking around, starting their fun celebration in honor of a friend's birthday. Some time passed, and our hero and his girls came back after shopping. He complained about how much stuff they had bought. The main character finally finished stuffing all those bags and stuff into the trunk. Suddenly, someone in the distance called out to the black-haired boy, and he naturally turned around. As it turned out, it was the same policewoman who had earlier detained the guy. But he escaped. She ordered him to put handcuffs on. The young lad was clearly not eager to fulfill her request, as he didn't think he was guilty of anything. After a moment, the young man's face fills with wonder, for he sees something strange in the distance. The policewoman immediately turns around to see what caused the protagonist to be so surprised. But as it turned out, it was just our hero's usual ploy to escape. A distraction, so to speak. When the girl turned around, the young boy was already riding away from her on his bicycle, while she threateningly shouted threats at him. Moments later, the police began chasing a young kid who was chasing at full force on a bicycle. At this time, Miss Sleep came in, who was greatly surprised when she realized that she couldn't find our hero anywhere. Meanwhile, there was a cute couple innocently strolling along the sidewalk, having a fun discussion about something. Suddenly, a hero on a bicycle whizzed right by them. The girl gave a startled look at what it had just been, and while she did, her ice cream fell to the ground. The police still continued to chase the protagonist, who just as surely didn't want to give up and kept driving away. Pedestrians were surprised to see a police car chasing a cyclist. It looked quite strange. It seems the black-haired kid was in serious trouble because the women didn't want to fall behind. If things continue at this pace, the bike tires just won't hold up. The young man urgently needs to come up with a plan to escape. Suddenly, he notices a turn in an alley and decides to use it. The police car slows down a bit, but also pulls into this small alley. The policewoman smiles slyly as she is determined to catch this fugitive. He can't escape. The young lad relaxed and got off his bike, for he thought he had gotten away from that schizo policewoman. But suddenly, the familiar handcuffs snap back on our hero's wrists. The policewoman caught up with him. The young boy is really annoyed. All the girl does all day is chase after him. What does she want? The policewoman must do her duty and bring the young man to the station, since he escaped last time. The black-haired kid hasn't done anything illegal. He decides to try that trick again and distract the girl by saying there's a robbery going on. The girl thinks it's a ruse, but our hero convinces her otherwise. They say there's already a whole crowd gathered there. Suddenly the girl hears some screams and noise, so she starts to believe the main character. After a moment, she goes to check what's going on and tells the guy to stand peacefully and wait for her. But of course, the young men are not going to just stand there and wait, so immediately breaks the handcuffs and frees himself. He hears voices about a policewoman asking to release a hostage. This gets our hero's attention. It seems the robber has taken a hostage. Since the young man has never seen such a wound, he wants to see it in person. A huge crowd of people gathered around the robber and watched the whole thing in horror. The perpetrator threatened to shoot a policeman in the head. The hostage was a little girl, but the policewoman had switched places with her and was at a disadvantage herself. The protagonist watches carefully and notices that the policewoman has a really kind heart. The perpetrator put a gun to the girl's temple, threatening to shoot her. He had no other choice. The perp sets conditions. He tells everyone to leave and get his car ready for him to escape, or he'll kill that pathetic cop. The black-haired boy sighs heavily, complaining that leaving without trouble apparently won't work. Moments later, the young man falls out of the crowd right onto the floor, then attracts everyone's attention. Afterward, he immediately stands up and fixes his hair to make you look normal. The officer yells loudly and tells him to leave, because it's very dangerous here and he has to save his life. The protagonist tries to contact this criminal by saying that he has always been a loyal fan. One woman in the crowd started to get indignant because she noticed that this scoundrel stole her bag, but our hero needed it. The black-haired kid starts telling a story about how he always wanted to be like Brother Lon. He complained about this policewoman who chased him around for an hour. The policewoman was angry at Lin Mu for saying that. She was right about him being the ultimate criminal. The young boy quickly shuts her up and tells her not to get involved in their conversation. He shows his disrespect for her. The man asks to stop talking nonsense. He needs to get out of here first, so he asks Lin Mu to get him a car, and after that they can't talk. Then the young man pretends to follow a police car that was parked not far away. Suddenly, a young kid yells about a sniper targeting them and points his finger somewhere in the distance. This immediately scares the criminal, and he starts looking around to see where to expect the threat from. Well, when the scumbag looks at the place our hero showed him, he doesn't see anyone there. Looks like the guy just tricked him. Seizing the moment, the protagonist throws the bag he took from a passing girl right in the direction of the criminal. The young man tosses the bag directly at the gun that was in the man's hand. The bag knocks the gun away and changes its course. Suddenly there's a misfire. The perpetrator tries to shoot, but nothing happens. The young lad deftly grabs the criminal by the arm and immobilizes him. He then elbows him with a stick, freeing the policewoman from the scumbag's grip. Immediately afterward, the perpetrator begins to lose his balance, and it feels as if the ground is slipping from under his feet. Thus, the young lad manages to get this scumbag to the ground and twist his arms so he won't do anything about it. Now everyone's safe, and the cop is getting ready to arrest the creep. At this point, our hero asks the officer to give the purse to the woman he borrowed it from. His hands are full. The policewoman complies with the request without question, putting the one that fell out of her when she fell into her purse. After that, backup arrives and 2 cops take this scumbag into a car to arrest him and take him to the station. An hour or so passes and finally the black-haired kid goes home with peace of mind. There he is immediately met by a concerned woman who doesn't understand where he has been all day and where he has disappeared to. She immediately wonders what happened, but the young man doesn't want to bring it up. He is very unlucky. But the woman still tries to find out what happened because they were very worried. The guy explains that it was just an accident. A young man enters the living room and asks what the girls are watching. It's Yao Xianxian's concert, which Zixi really wants to go to, but tickets are very hard to get. The girl asks if the guy is going to apologize for dumping them like that without warning. The black-haired kid calms her down and informs her that he will definitely redeem himself. Suddenly our hero urgently needed to leave to call someone, so he stepped away. The girls were very worried, for he had just returned home and he had some trouble again. Sometimes it seemed to the girls that Lin Mu was not a student at all, but an adult and mature man. He seemed very masculine for his age. Zixi found many positive traits in the main character, not just masculinity. After a while, Linmu returns to the living room and asks if the girls have time to go to the coveted concert in 3 days. The girl immediately jumps up, overjoyed, because she has long dreamed of going to Yao Xianxian's concert. Where did the guy get the tickets? The protagonist did not reveal the secret. Answer that he has connections. If no one minds, they can go to the concert in 3 days. Some time passed and the guys went out for a snack. Everyone was already tired and hungry, and so the boys entered the cafeteria, but were greatly surprised, for the place was very quiet today. The young boy was greatly surprised to see such an attractive girl in the cafeteria. What is she doing here today? The black-haired girl averted her gaze and seemed to notice our hero as well. Suddenly, the main character saw a bright blue light in the girl's chest and immediately realized what it was. The young lad immediately guessed that this girl was also a cultivator. Zixi noticed the young man watching this attractive girl, who seems to be a rather calm person. Suddenly, the girl stepped on the kid's foot with all her might, and he screamed. The black-haired boy didn't understand why he had received such an unexpected blow. She told him not to look so intently at that girl, and rather go get them something to eat, for they were starving. Right after that, our hero started to recognize the girls, if they knew that brunette stranger. But unfortunately, no one knew her, not even the instructor. The boy was saddened by this. The woman began teasing the young man, saying that he seemed to have fallen in love at first sight. The protagonist immediately began to deny it, and justifying his interest by the fact that the girl seems very familiar to him. Hearing such a boring answer, the woman only unhappily clucked her tongue. Our hero tried to soften the girls up a bit, and reminded them that he had tickets for front-row seats. The girls, so be it. Forgive the kid and get their tickets. The woman forgives our hero for abandoning them last time and leaving without warning. She says she will take the boys to the concert tomorrow after school. The next day comes. The music is playing loudly in the room. The hall is completely filled with people who are in anticipation of the concert. The girls make their way inside. They are still surprised that Linmu managed to get them such fancy seats. It feels like there are over 1,000 police officers patrolling just for the concert. But so many people are here. But it was quite expected since Yao Xianxian is one of the most popular singers. The black-haired boy was a little surprised at this fact, for he could not even think of such a thing. And here, not a few minutes later, the long-awaited singer comes on stage all around shining, and the whole stage is illuminated with footlights. The girl stands confidently on stage and greets all her audience. She sincerely thanks them for the tickets they bought. The crowd is already excited for the start of the concert. Everyone is shouting loudly and cheering the appearance of their favorite star. It's only because of her fans that she's here today, so she wants to dedicate this song to everyone who supports her. And then, just moments later, the singer starts the concert with a song, Descendant of True Love. Thus 03. Time flies by quickly, but the next part of the performance promises to be a lot of fun. The girl reports that she wants to invite someone from the audience to help her with her performance. After a moment, the girl asks the organizers to turn on the lights. She will now randomly select a lucky winner. Zixi wants to get on stage incredibly badly and shouts loudly, waving her hands. She doesn't want to miss this chance. The light is already very close to the girl and heading in her direction. Hope appears in her eyes. Moments later, the singer tells the lights to stop. Now we find out who was the lucky one. The light stopped on our hero, and the singer asked him to go on stage. The young man in no way expected such a turn of events. The singer graciously greeted our hero and waited eagerly to get up on stage. Zixi was a little hurt that she didn't get to join her idol on stage, but at the same time, she was happy for her acquaintance. The main character didn't seem to be burning to get up on stage, but since he's a lucky guy, he has to take the chance. The young boy felt a little embarrassed at the thought, for he was well aware that he could not sing. The girl began to tease the young man and said that if he did not go on stage now, he would badly set up the singer. But the young lad didn't seem to care about that at all. After all, it was his decision. The girl turned to the young man and asked if he was very shy, so he couldn't come on stage to her. Linmu recognized his shyness and told the singer to give such a wonderful opportunity to someone else. Hearing this, everyone in the hall began to cheer and applaud our hero because he said very beautiful words. The singer was not at all upset by the rejections and agreed to give someone else the opportunity. A couple seconds later, the light shone on someone else in the room. It was a man. Moments later, it was the lucky guy who got up on stage and sang the song along with his idol. When they finished the performance, they hugged each other tightly. The fan was madly happy about such an opportunity, and the girl thanked him for his support. That's how the concert came to an end. Everyone applauded loudly and did not want to leave, but it was time. The guys were going home. Everyone was filled with energy after the concert because it was really cool. But Zixi was a little upset that she didn't get a chance to sing with her idol. Suddenly 2 men appeared behind our hero's back and called out to him, and he turned around. It was the guards who informed the protagonist that their mistress wanted to see him. The black-haired boy didn't immediately understand who he was talking about, so he asked again. It turns out that Yao Xianxian wanted to see him. But why? The young boy was greatly surprised by such a sharp desire on the part of the popular star. In the end, Lin Mu agreed and told the girls to leave. Later he would catch a cab and return home. The instructor had no problem letting the kid go and told him to be alert. And his girlfriend pipped him again and asked him not to forget about them after meeting the singer. And so when our hero was alone, he asked the guards to take them to his mistress. 5 minutes had passed, and the young lad had already arrived at the right door, which was open. When the young man opened the door, he found the girl, who was just changing her clothes. She was in her underwear. The young boy was shocked by what he saw and fell into a stupor. He felt embarrassed that he had caught the girl like that. The protagonist immediately left the room and closed the door tightly behind him, apologizing along the way. The brunette assured him that everything was fine. She didn't feel awkward at all. Turns out she'd thought it was a servant. She invited the lad in, for she had already changed her clothes. A black-haired boy entered the room and inquired for what purpose the girl had called him. As it turned out, the young lady was very curious as to why the young man refused to go on stage. The protagonist did not immediately answer her question, but asked to eat more modestly, for he is a young man in the prime of his life. The brunette was thoroughly amused by this, and she smirked quietly. The young lad wasn't going to waste much time on this, so he turned around and headed for the exit. But the girl didn't let him just walk away. She asked the guy to wait and quickly got up, then headed towards him. She walked briskly toward the boy. Her heels clacked on the floor. When she approached him, she gave him a quick peck on the lips. The young man was clearly not expecting it. The young boy was stunned by such an unexpected and sudden action of the girl. He did not know how to react. Immediately after that, the singer pulled away. The young man thought that something was wrong with the girl, and she might be feeling ill. But as it turned out, it was just a normal way of stopping the guy to chat with him a little longer. But the black-haired kid understood what they could talk about, since he was a nobody and the girl was a celebrity. She tells him that Lin Mu is the first man to turn her down. Before that, no man had ever peppered her, no matter what she asked. The protagonist undeniably recognized the girl's attractiveness, but reported that not every man would buy it. That's why our hero was interested in the singer. It really hurt her self-esteem. The kid apologized if he somehow hurt her self-esteem. He's still embarrassed. After that, the young man turned around and headed for the exit, because there was nothing to discuss. The young girl followed his gaze with curiosity. She was studying him. The black-haired kid went to the bathroom to wash his face. He has to get rid of the lipstick residue, or there's no way he'll be able to explain it if he's suddenly caught. The young man had to hurry home, because if he did not return soon, the neighbor would be angry with him. To get home quickly, our hero decides to call a cab. He goes outside. Suddenly, behind his back, the young boy feels someone's presence. There is some stranger in a cloak standing behind him, telling him to turn around so that everything will go smoothly and quietly. The protagonist turned around and put his hands in the air. He wanted to know information about why they wanted to kill him and who sent this guy. Under normal circumstances, a murderer told the truth to a man who was about to die. But as he saw the young man's face, it discouraged all desire. A moment later, sharp claw-like blades appeared between the stranger's fingers. The stranger was quickly approaching our hero to finish what he had started and finish him off. The protagonist immediately realized that the stranger was using a throwing knife against him. And so, as the killer threw them at the kid caught them in one deft movement. The black-haired kid caught the knives and continued the conversation, as if nothing had happened, trying to find out who had sent an assassin after him. The stranger realized he couldn't kill the young man now, so he promised to come back for him later. The young lad was greatly disappointed that the stranger was going to leave without saying anything. After a moment, he took aim and hurled the knives at our hero. The weapon flew with a ringing whistle, cutting through the wind. One of the throwing knives stabbed into the ground right in front of the young boy's feet. The stranger threatened the young man with reprisal if he took another step. Then, the black-haired kid decided to let the stranger go, telling him to come back when he was 100% sure of himself. The young boy looked at him silently and wondered who could have ordered such a tough mercenary. The killer wasn't fighting at full strength. The young man wasn't even sure he could handle him alone. The protagonist decides not to dwell on it now. His main goal at the moment is to become stronger. When the stranger disappeared around the corner, our hero calmly went to his home, where his girlfriends were already waiting for him. Lin Mu puzzles over why he's attracting attention to kill, even though he's acting as carefully as possible. Unexpectedly, but the hero felt some strange feeling that made all the cells of the body tense up. The young man sensed that this something was coming from the girl in front of him. As it turned out, the brunette also recognized our hero as that guy from the cafeteria. Suddenly, something strange began to happen to the girl. Her whole body was on pins and needles. She didn't understand why her frosty chi was so aroused and what caused such a reaction. Was it related to this strange guy? A young boy saw that the girl wasn't feeling well, so he approached to inquire about her well-being. The protagonist took the girl by the shoulder and wondered if he should risk asking about chi, but just a moment later, the brunette jerked her hand away and pulled away from the guy. She screamed and tried to find out what he wanted from her. Our hero tried to be friendly and explained that they attend the same university, but the brunette wouldn't even listen to him, and a moment later she was running away. The young lad couldn't afford to let this mysterious stranger go so easily, for he needs to get to the bottom of this. That's why the young man started to catch up with the fugitive. He wanted to ask her a question. Suddenly the girl just started floating and flying up into the air. The black-haired kid went into a stupor when she saw this. The protagonist immediately realized that it was Ching Tsung. A moment later, the girl was already hidden on the roofs of buildings. The boy noticed that her movements were graceful, which meant that she was practicing. But even so, our hero is not going to give up and continues his pursuit. The young lad chased this stranger for 2 whole hours, but finally lost her. The young man tried to catch his breath, in parallel looking around and trying to figure out where he had run to. Suddenly the black-haired boy heard a bell ringing. When he turned around, he saw a huge, luxurious temple behind him. Without any hesitation, the young man decided to go inside and take a look at it in person. The place was full of people, each asking for blessings and help from the higher powers. Suddenly, the young lad felt an enormous amount of chi emanating from within this temple. The protagonist was desperately trying to figure out what this place was, as he suddenly saw some man. In the center of the empty room sat an elderly man who radiated the golden aura of a Buddhist. Our hero immediately noticed the aura around the old man, and at first couldn't even believe his eyes. The black-haired boy watched this stranger's every move carefully. He didn't realize how the old man was right in front of him, though he didn't take his eyes off him. The man asked what he could do to help this guy, since he had been standing there for an hour. Linmu deflected apologized, explaining that he was lost in thought. The young lad immediately realized that this kind monk had the aura of a non-mortal. Starry calmed him down and explained that he had come up to help, for he felt that the young man really had a good heart. He called him to follow him. The black-haired boy immediately followed his grandfather, eager to find answers to his questions. Linmu inquired what this place was all about. It turned out to be the place where the old man meditates for Buddhist enlightenment. The protagonist saw a hovering statue in front of him. It greeted the man with words about Amitabha Buddha. The protagonist was surprised to realize that a monk was cultivating here. The man looked in amazement before him. He realized that he was seeing before him the real face of the legendary Buddha. Buddha told the guy that he had heavy sins on his soul. He offered him a set of techniques in cultivation. The protagonist thanked the Buddha with very great enthusiasm. An enlightened deity held out his hands to the protagonist and told him he would get something. A very bright beam struck the main character's head. He felt something enter him. The teacher thought to himself that he had not expected the Buddha to bestow great power on the young man. The old man served his hands in prayer and pronounced the blessing with the words about Amitabha Buddha. The next day, the main character woke up in the house. The sun was already high. The guy jumped up abruptly in bed. He was still wearing yesterday's clothes. The young man was surprised. At first, he even thought that everything that had happened to him had been a dream. The guy put his hand to his head and felt pain. He realized that the pain came from knowledge and spiritual energy. The protagonist was walking around the yard and was surprised to think to himself that he had been in this place for a whole night. The teacher prayerfully ministered his hands and greeted the young man. The boy bowed to the grandmaster and thanked him for the gift. The old man told the protagonist that kindness has no limits. He wished the guy to cherish the knowledge he received from Buddha. The protagonist very humbly told his interlocutor that he had learned a great deal. At noon, the guy arrived at Dunne University. The lecturer in the lecture was talking about derivatives. The boy thought to himself that the temple he was in was known for its seals. They ward off bad luck. The protagonist thought with a smile that kindness and respect for everyone was not gratuitous. The protagonist thought to himself that he still didn't have enough spiritual energy for the new technique. The guy thought to himself cheerfully that the technique would still come in handy for him. The protagonist, sitting in the audience, decided happily to himself that he had gotten to the spirit accumulation stage faster than he had expected. The guy decided happily that thanks to the key energy he had when he was reborn, he didn't need to exert any effort to pass the realm of foundation building. The student thought to himself that after receiving the technique, he had immediately jumped to the spirit accumulation stage. There were several stages in the fusion realm. First, the spirit accumulation stage began. Then came the Xian Tian stage, and then the deep connection stage. The guy thought to himself that when one passed to the spirit stage, he had already become several times stronger than he was at the peak of the foundation formation realm. The protagonist rejoiced at his accomplishments. He laughed to himself. The student realized just in time. He had forgotten he was in a class at the university. The teacher asked Lin Mu sternly, did his subject seem funny to him? The guy apologized to the teacher. A student was walking down the street. Annoyed, he banged his hand against the wall with all his might. Lin Mu told his own self sternly that he was very forgetful. He wouldn't be able to recover the name of the strongest cultivator if he rejoiced in every little thing. Suddenly, the protagonist is hit by a very strong and vivid feeling. Lin Mu looked sideways at the girl. He told himself that it was her. The main character looked closer. He realized that he saw a girl with black hair and wearing a long dress. Lin Mu realized that he had reached the spirit gathering stage. As a result, he began to sense the girl's presence from a great distance. There was something wrong with her, and he decided to find out everything this time. The girl looked at the guy and asked grudgingly, who was he? The protagonist said his name and asked what the name of his interlocutor was. The girl said her name was Ji Qinglan. Lin Mu smilingly suggested to his new acquaintance to find out why their QE energies were reacting very strangely to each other. Ji told the guy that he was as ignorant as herself. The girl said it would be bad if things continued like this. The girlfriend suggested the guy go to quiet place. They can check out what makes their chai react that way. Half an hour later, the protagonist and his new acquaintance found themselves in a deep forest. Lin Mu asked the girl what they should do now. The girlfriend replied unhappily that she didn't know herself. The guy sat down on the ground. He had the girl connect their chi and see what happens. Ji was excited about this idea. She agreed with the guy with a smile. Lin sat across from his girlfriend. They closed their eyes and held each other's hands. The guy told the girl to focus on her breathing. People sat in deep meditation. The guy felt their chi interacting much more strongly. The girl felt that her icy chi was now much clearer than usual. The main character realized that the girl's chi was much purer. He has the same situation. The guy couldn't figure out what technique his girlfriend was practicing. He felt something cool in her. People stopped meditating. Lin told his girlfriend that their chi was now purer. Chi said with surprise to the guy, her frosty chi now seemed very strong. The protagonist enthusiastically told his girlfriend that they would both benefit more if they continued. He added that something more was in store for them. The girl looked at the main character and said that they could try again. She asked that the guy let out more chi this time. People put their hands on each other. The girl said to start. A bluish energy began to rage between the hands of the Linya and his new acquaintance. Lin Mu sat in front of his girlfriend with his eyes closed. He was immersed in meditation. Ji was in a meditative state. She continued to exchange energy with her friend. People sat in meditation for an hour. They were silent and motionless. Energy traveled between Lin and his girlfriend. They touched each other tightly with their palms. Eventually, the protagonist and his new acquaintance were able to move to another realm. Sitting in another dimension, the main character felt that the chi-he in that place was very dense. He could feel everything that was happening around him. The boy came to his senses and opened his eyes. He was a little startled and shy. Lin saw a naked girl beside him. Ji felt a refreshing feeling around her. The protagonist turned his head sharply to the side. He told himself that he hadn't seen anything. The girlfriend came to her senses. She turned her head to the side unhappily and glared at the guy. Ji was very much startled and shy. She realized that there was a naked guy sitting next to her. The girl was angry. She yelled very loudly that her new friend was a pervert. Ji, very angry, knocked the main character's swinging hand on his face. Lin Mu was very much amazed and surprised. He realized that all of this was really happening to him. The guy excitedly asked the girl to wake up. He explained to her that it was all an illusion. Ji came to her senses. She said fearfully that everything seemed so real to her. The protagonist told his girlfriend that because of the chi fusion, they were able to sense the divine consciousness beforehand. Ji felt embarrassed. She asked the guy if it was because of the fusion of chi. Lin said seriously to the girl that chi fusion has 3 stages. Divine consciousness is created after reaching the divine territory. The guy explained to his girlfriend that due to divine consciousness, they were suddenly naked. Lin thought pro his own cultivation knowledge. He realized that all of this was definitely divine consciousness. Ji asked the main character his name again. The guy confirmed that his name was Lin Mu. Girlfriend shyly asked the main character if he had a girlfriend. Lin Mu glanced at his interlocutor. He wondered to her why she was asking. Ji glanced at the guy and demanded sternly that he answer. Lin Mu said fearfully to his new girlfriend that he didn't have a girlfriend. The girl sternly asked the guy if he was telling her the truth. Lin Mu replied to the girl that he would not lie to her. Ji angrily told the protagonist that if he deceived her, he wouldn't leave here. The protagonist asked the girl why she was asking about it. Ji told her about her grandfather's words. The old man told her that she should marry someone to whom she would give her body. If she couldn't marry such a guy, she would have to kill him. Linmu said in a soothing voice to the interlocutor that her grandfather was completely right. The main character asked the girl excitedly how she wanted to marry him if she didn't give him her body. Ji angrily yelled at the guy that he should take responsibility for her. She explained that the guy saw her body and took her innocence. The interlocutor tried to justify himself. Lin said soothingly to his girlfriend that it was all an illusion that the divine consciousness had created. Ji looked at her friend sternly and said that what he saw through divine consciousness was more real than what he sees with his eyes. The companion explained to the guy that their family also had a master of divine territory. She saw the notes left behind. The guy realized that he couldn't fool his girlfriend. The girl said grudgingly to the guy that he now had to be sure to marry her. Linmu told a serious girlfriend that marriage is a very serious thing. He warned her that they might not be right for each other. Ji began to tell the protagonist with a clever look the wisdom her grandfather had told her. The boy told the interviewer that her grandfather had taught her many things. He asked what else the old man had told her. Ji remembered her grandfather telling her not to get married too soon. She had to wait until graduation. Lin thought happily to himself that the girlfriend might insist that they get married today. Ji-do disappeared in the middle of the forest. The protagonist was returning home by himself. He said to himself that girls had become very frivolous. The guy thought worldly problems were annoying him. He decided to reach the stage of original peace. Suddenly, the protagonist heard a noise behind him. He realized that someone was running after him. A strange guy ran up and yelled for the protagonist to get out of the way. The stranger in the hat was running at full speed. He shouted for Linmu to move aside. Lin bounced aside in time. He realized the guy wasn't after him. The protagonist could not understand why the stranger was running so fast down the street. Lin noticed a girl in a police uniform running. She looked familiar to him. The protagonist thought about it. He thought the cop was jogging. Lin continued to ponder. He decided that in order to be a police officer, he had to make a run for it. The main character remembered the stranger. He thought there was something strange about that guy. Linmu recalled with excitement the stranger's gaze as he ran past him. The protagonist remembered that this kind of evil look is very common in this world. Linmu realized that the stranger wasn't as good as the cultivation masters, but he too exuded a lust for killing. The protagonist thought excitedly that the policewoman was chasing a criminal. Suddenly there were very loud gunshots in the alley. The guy got excited. Linmu said to himself fearfully as he heard the sounds of gunshots. The guy accelerated and started running. He realized he let the perp slide. The protagonist ran to the alley. He realized the shots were coming from there. Linmu ran into the alley. He noticed the girl lying on the ground. Opposite stood the perpetrator with a gun. The intruder shouted to the girl that she had not even spared her life to catch him. The policewoman was very wounded. She was lying on the ground and struggled to say something. Linmu ran up to the girl and asked excitedly, was she all right? The protagonist looked at the girl with excitement. He lifted her in his arms. Linmu took a closer look and noticed that the perpetrator's bullet had hit the policewoman in the heart. The guy thought about it. He realized the bullet must have missed his heart. Linmu told the injured woman not to worry. He explained that the bullet had not hit her heart, so she would be fine. The girl asked the main character who he was. The cop asked the guy to run away and leave her to herself. The guy told the girl to cover the wound with her hand. The girl shouted frightened to the protagonist, not to go to the criminal. He had a gun. The guy promised the policewoman that he would deal with the bandit and take her to the hospital. The policewoman was scared. She told the protagonist he was crazy. The protagonist walked confidently towards the criminal. The bandit with a gun in his hands shouted to the guy that he was not afraid of death. The intruder yelled at the guy for watching movies. He yelled at the guy to show him the harsh reality. The intruder fired a gun at the protagonist and shouted that he was going to die. The main character was in the public safety building. He was talking to a police officer. Lin explained to the officer the details of everything that had happened. He said that if there were no questions, he would leave. The officer held out his hand to the guy and told him to wait. Lin asked the officer what else he wanted. The policeman shook the guy's hand. He thanked him for helping him get Van Seelen to the hospital. The protagonist replied that he had done what he had to do. Linmu was in the building of the city hospital. The doctor said the patient was undergoing surgery and asked that relatives wait outside. The guy was standing outside the operating room door. He couldn't figure out why no one had come out yet. Linmu thought excitedly to himself that the situation with the injured girl was far from optimistic. There was the sound of the door opening in the operating room. The protagonist realized that he would finally find out what was wrong with the policewoman. A group of doctors were carrying an injured girl on a gurney. One of them said to be careful. Lin Mu thought to himself that if he had reacted earlier, the girl wouldn't be in this state right now. The guy saw a girl lying unconscious. He asked Officer Van how she was feeling. The doctor came in. She explained that the effects of anesthesia hadn't worn off yet. The girl couldn't hear the protagonist. Lin Mu inquired of Dr. Zhou, "What is the condition of the policewoman?" Zhou calmly explained to the protagonist that the operation had been successful. There was no threat to Wang's life now. The main character told the doctor he had something to tell the girl. He asked for permission to go in to see her. Zhou explained that the policewoman was just out of surgery and needed to rest. She told the guy to come back tomorrow. Ling Mu asked the doctor to make an exception to the rules for him. The doctor was surprised. The protagonist told his interlocutor that he'd be done very quickly. Zhou told the guy that he could come into the room in 10 minutes when the patient woke up. She added to let Lin Mu speak slowly. The guy thanked the doctor very cheerfully and with a smile for her favor. 10 minutes later, the protagonist entered the room. He told Officer Bath that he had come to check on her. The girl was lying on the bed. She looked at the main character and called his name. The guy asked his interlocutor, how on earth did she know his name? Van explained with a smile that she was a police officer after all. The policewoman asked the guy apprehensively if the perpetrator had been captured. Suddenly the girl coughed. She found it very difficult to speak. The protagonist told the officer to rest and not to make any unnecessary movements. Lin Mu realized that the policewoman didn't know that he had stopped the criminal. He realized that he would have to waste time explaining. A couple hours earlier, a girl was lying unconscious. She was very hurt. The protagonist told the criminal with a smile that his method of shooting is nowhere near good enough. The intruder was surprised. He couldn't figure out why he couldn't hit the guy. The bandit fired a gun at the protagonist. There's no way he could have hit him. The perp was startled to realize he was out of ammunition in his weapon. The bandit fearfully asked the protagonist if he was even human. The guy stood calmly. Lin Mu crushed the culprit with a very powerful punch. The culprit could not stand on his feet. The bandit was badly injured after the blow. He coughed up blood. The perpetrator fell unconscious to the ground. The protagonist realized that his blow would not kill the intruder. Lin Mu remembered the injured policewoman. He decided to help her. The main character picked up the girl. She was unconscious due to massive blood loss. Lin Mu began to check the girl's pulse with great attention. He realized that she was still alive. The protagonist noticed that the policewoman's pulse was very weak. He realized that he had to send her to the hospital. In the hospital, the protagonist told a policewoman that some stranger in only underpants stabbed the perpetrator in the chest. After that, the perpetrator fell to the ground. Lin Mu explained in a convincing voice to the girl that if it wasn't for the stranger's help, they wouldn't be alive anymore. Fan with a smile decided to ask the interlocutor if the muscular guy had a red cape. The cop grudgingly told the guy he'd been watching superhero movies. She realized he was lying to her. Lin Mu decided to help the girl up. He told Wang not to say anything else. The protagonist thought to himself that the girl had figured out his lie. Lin Mu took out a small brown pill from the box. He decided to offer it to the girl. The protagonist held out a pill on his hand to the policewoman. She stared in amazement. Lin Mu smilingly promised his interlocutor that the pill wouldn't harm her. The cop took the pill and cracked it. She agreed to take it. A doctor came in. She told the main character that the Van girl had relatives coming to see her. Lin Mu told the girl that he understood everything, and he was ready to leave the ward. Van thanked the protagonist for the medicine and said goodbye. The guy wished the policewoman recovery. He informed her that he would visit her in a couple of days. The girl's parents anxiously asked how their daughter's health was. Jo reassuringly told her parents not to worry. She explained that Van was already safe and they could check on her. The main character waved goodbye to Dr. Zhou and said he was leaving. Suddenly, the girl shouted for the guy to stop. Lin Mu wondered what else happened. Zhou asked the protagonist, "What is this medicine he has just given to the sick?" The doctor explained to the protagonist that seriously ill people can't eat anything. Lin Mu said with a smile to the doctor that he had only given the patient vitamin C. The protagonist thought to himself that he had given the girl drugs to affect her injuries. Ling Mu left and told Dr. Zhou that he had to go. He promised to come back in a couple of days. Zhou realized that the guy was no longer the same old Lin Mu. The girl couldn't understand who had just been in front of her. The main character was sitting in the house the next morning, chatting with the girls. A friend with glasses said she really likes cooked food. She'd eat it all her life. The red-haired girlfriend asked the protagonist why he had come back so late last night, and Lin Mu explained that he had met a former classmate, and they had been chatting. The girl looked closely at the guy and asked again, was it really like that? Lin Mu took the glass in his hands and asked the girl, does she really doubt him? The girl looked at the protagonist and told him to ignore the girlfriend. She explained that she liked to ask stupid questions. The girlfriend suggested that the main character go out in the evening and have fun. Lin Mu suggested to the girls that they take him along to their classmate's birthday party. The interviewee told the guy with a smile that he would meet the new acquaintance once, and they would become friends. The protagonist didn't like the offer very much. He decided to object to the girl. The conversationalist smiled at the guy and said that Lin Mu would go with them in the evening. The night before, the guy and his girlfriends were driving down the road in a car. The red-haired girl told the guy that she hadn't seen her friend in a long time. She didn't even think that she still remembered them. The interviewee said that because of the family business, she and her girlfriend gradually drifted apart. The girl with glasses said with a smile that she and her acquaintance were in different worlds. A little later in the evening, the guy and the girls arrived at a huge building. Lin Mu was walking with his acquaintances through the hotel lobby. The girl explained that they were at the Princeton Restaurant Hotel. The main character along with the girls entered the elevator. One of them pressed the button for the 19th floor. The guy asked his girlfriends, was their former classmate named Shu really that rich? The girlfriend explained that the Sadu family has been passing down inheritance from generation to generation for centuries. It's the easiest way to get rich. The elevator arrived at the 19th floor with the passengers. The signal sounded. There were a lot of people at the banquet. There was a lively atmosphere everywhere. Lin Mu looked around in surprise. He was surprised that so many people had come because of an ordinary birthday party. A guy came over. He greeted the girl with a sunglass and offered to buy her a drink. The girl grudgingly told the guy in front of her that she didn't know who he was. Mu suddenly noted that he had a special feeling again. The protagonist sensed that one of the people in front of him had the aura of a true king. Lin Mu looked closely and noticed a beautiful girl in a yellow dress in front of him. She was accompanied by guards. The guy wondered. He couldn't understand why on earth this woman was exuding the aura of a true king. The stranger glanced at the protagonist and told him mentally not to stare at her like that. The protagonist was surprised. He couldn't understand how the girl could have mastered telepathy. Lin Mu thought to himself contentedly, there are many high-level people in this world. The girl looked at the protagonist and asked, what is he looking for? The guy replied that he was looking for a place to sit. One of the girls invited her companions to sit at the nearest table. Girlfriend asked the protagonist why he was looking at a strange girl like that. Did he find her so charming? At this time, a girl in a yellow dress came up on stage. The host asked all the guests for silence. The girl was surprised to realize that the protagonist had been looking at Shu all this time. Lin Mu happily confirmed to his girlfriends that the girl on stage is Satu. The protagonist excitedly thought to himself that he was very surprised that the source of the true king's aura would be the girl on stage. Situ looked at the guy with great surprise. She realized that he was communicating with her through telepathy. The girl got worried. She realized that someone might actually be able to figure out her family's secret. Situ said cheerfully from the stage that it was her birthday today. She thanked everyone for coming. The birthday girl's eyes sparkled. She said cheerfully to the guests that she thanked everyone and hoped they all had a good time. The people at the banquet all wished a happy birthday to Miss Cheese. The guys at the tables raised their hands in the air and joyfully started congratulating the girl. Lin Mu looked at the girl and happily thought that she was very charming. The host told the guests that they could line up to prepare gifts for the girl. People started one after another. Each of them had some kind of package or box in their hands. A guest told the girl joyfully that today he had made sure that she was very irresistible. The guest replied to the interlocutor that he had a very high opinion of her. The guy handed the box to the girl. He said it contained a modest gift from their company. Situ told all the guests from the stage that she thanked them for their wonderful gifts. The main character asked his girlfriends why they were not carrying their gift for the birthday girl. Song explained to the guy that only valuable gifts are given to the birthday girl. Ordinary gifts are given to the receptionist. Lin Mu said with surprise, it is very much Maroka to just give a gift to a girl. The main character jumped to his feet and told his girlfriends to wait. He also had a wish to give something to the birthday girl. The girl asked the guy fearfully, what does he want to give? She pointed out that he came empty-handed. The girlfriend said with a smile to the protagonist not to talk nonsense. Lin Mu walked down the aisle. He raised his hand and shouted that he had a personal gift for Miss Satu. The birthday girl got excited. She recognized the guy and she wanted to know what he was all about. The guards blocked the main character's way. They pointed out that he came empty-handed and asked him what he wanted to give. Lin Mu said calmly that he would like to dedicate a few words to Sat. He added that the girl would really benefit from it. People cheered a lot. They couldn't believe the guy wanted to give a couple words as a gift. The girl thought to herself that her friend was overreacting. She thought that the protagonist was about to be beaten up. Saitu said from the stage that she was grateful to the guy and was willing to listen to him. The girl hesitated. She decided to wait to see what the protagonist could pull off. The people around the protagonist waited in wonder. What is he going to say now? Lin Mu said. Seriously, he wanted to personally convey his congratulations to the girl. The host explained to the guy that the girl was ready to hear him out. That would be more than enough. She couldn't understand what the protagonist was trying to accomplish. The girl looked sternly at the host and said that the main character could go up. 6. The man told the guy that he could go up if the girl let him. Lin Mu thanked back. Lin Mu climbed up on the stage and walked towards the girl. The people around him were silent. The guy came close to the surprised girl and started whispering something in her ear. One of the guests said that the main character was very arrogant. He didn't like that he got so close to the cheese. The girl kept listening and listening to the guy. He kept telling her. Lin bowed to the girl and said these were the words he wanted to give her for her birthday. Situ was very pleased and amazed. She thanked the guy for enlightenment and for the show. The guests were very surprised. They didn't understand what the guy said and what just happened. Lin Mu walked over to the table where his girlfriends were sitting. He asked why their faces were not happy. The girl with the glasses told the main character that he scared them to death. The girlfriend slyly ranted at the guy and said they were expecting him to put on a show here. Lin Mu looked at the girls with a smile. He apologized for making them worry. Satu approached. She greeted her table mates named Yuju, Xuanrong, and Zizi. I looked at the main character and wondered what his name was. The main character gave his name. He told the girl she could just call him Ah Mu. The girl greeted the guy with a gesture and said it was nice to meet him. Lin replied to the new girlfriend that it was nice to meet him too. The red-haired girl asked with interest to her interlocutor, do they really portray the martial artists from the movies? He didn't even know what to say to his girlfriend. Situ said with a smile to the Zai girl that she was still just as funny. She added to her friends to eat and take your time. At night, the girl Satu returned to her family estate. She walked into the hall and greeted her father. The man looked attentively at his daughter and asked if the banquet had been fun. Situ sat down next to the man. She told him she had something she wanted to discuss. The girl told father affectionately that she did not want to study in Kyoto. She asked that he return her to Dunhai University. The man reminded his daughter that she herself had insisted on going to Kyoto University. Saitu looked joyfully at her father and said that she wanted to stay with him in the Dunhai. The man asked his daughter if she really wanted to stay with him. The girl said she did. The man excitedly told his daughter that she made him very happy. He held her close to him. Saitu remembered that the protagonist had pointed out her main 4 flaws. She decided to correct these shortcomings in a short time. The man was in the karate room. There were warriors standing against him. They asked the president if he was ready. Luchin Xiaojiro got into a fighting stance. He said that he was attacking his opponents. The president accelerated to hit the athlete across from him with all his might. Luchin thuds his opponent's hand into his defensive glove with a big thud. The athlete could not withstand the blow. He flew aside and could not stay on his feet. The man decided to continue the attack. He shoved off and ran with all his might. The president swung his leg. He shouted to his opponents that he wasn't done yet. The athlete stood and looked fearfully at the president. He prepared to repel the attack. Lucan crushed the athletes with a very big leg kick. The president cheerfully told his opponents that he hit them easy and they can't get up anymore. The guy lifted himself off the floor. He apologized to the president in a tired voice. Lucan helped the guy up. He told the other athletes to keep practicing. The fighters gave a friendly bow to the man and said they would do just that. Lucan told himself thoughtfully that it was time to visit that man. The main character was in Dunhai University. There were other students around him. Lin stopped. He noticed with surprise that there was a familiar girl beside him. A student told his friend that he noticed an ice girl Ji Qinglan near him. The girlfriend saw the main character. She said he came over. Ji wanted to say something to him. He went to his girlfriend and asked her what was wrong. He wondered why she didn't tell him right away. The girlfriend grabbed the protagonist's hand and led the way. He was surprised. The girlfriend told the guy to just walk beside her and not to worry. The student said that the girl Jai turns out to be able to love too. The friend replied to the guy that Lin Mu had already taken 3 female students from the university. The student explained calmly that if a guy was born cool, he could do whatever he wanted. The protagonist and his girlfriend were camping in the woods. He asked the girl why so much caution. Ji told the interlocutor seriously that her father wanted to meet him. She added to have the guy go to her house. Lin interjected with surprise at the girl. Does her father really want to see him? Ji said in a shy voice that her father wanted to meet his future son-in-law. Lin Mu sternly reminded the interlocutor that they had previously agreed to wait. The girl angrily asked the protagonist, has he changed his mind? Lin asked her girlfriend to calm down. The protagonist explained to the girl that he couldn't just go to her house. A man walked up next to him. He asked the protagonist if he was Mr. Lin Mu. The main character was walking with his girlfriend. She asked him to walk slower. The girlfriend said excitedly that Lucien had never lost at Tokyo University. She asked her friend if he was sure he could do it. The protagonist thought to himself that he had no worthy opponent after his visit to the Lingjing Temple. He hoped to himself that Xiaojiro would not disappoint him. Half an hour ago, a guy and a girl were standing in the woods. Across from them was a man in a suit. Lucien told the protagonist that he was the president of a karate club at Tokyo University. He invited the guy to fight him. Zhe was very angry. She told the man displeased that she was now talking to Lin Mu. The president strictly said that the Ling must definitely agree to the duel. The maiden looked at her interlocutor unhappily and asked what would happen if the guy didn't agree. The protagonist pointed his hand to the side and told the man that he agreed to his challenge. Lucien thanked the guy and said he'd be waiting for him at 6 o'clock tonight at the school stadium. Lin said confidently to his girlfriend not to worry. He can beat his opponent. Zai told the guy not to lose by any means. She reminded him that Lin is her fiancé, and she doesn't want to see him beaten. At 6 o'clock in the evening, many spectators had gathered at the sports stadium. Lucien sat on the floor and prepared for battle. The man sat in a deep and meditative pose. He was silent and very focused. One of the fighters said the president is going up against a tough opponent tonight. One of the girls excitedly shouted that Lin Mu had finally arrived. The main character was walking quietly with his girlfriend. Everyone around him was silent. Lin was very surprised. He couldn't understand why the people around him were all looking at him. One of the fighters looked at the protagonist unhappily and said that the guy looked weak. Lin asked Xiaojiro before the battle started, why did he want to fight him so urgently? The man became agitated. He wanted to explain to the guy why he had challenged him to a fight. Lu Sheng said that he had heard how the Ling had defeated Mr. Li Guanjuya, so he decided to fight him. The man told the protagonist that he wasn't going to avenge his friend. The protagonist remembered whether Guanjue was courting and harassing the dream teacher. The man bowed to the protagonist and said that he wanted to exchange experiences with him in this duel. Lin Mu said obediently to the man that he would not fight at full strength. The lush asked the protagonist to be unmerciful to him. The man said excitedly that when he fights hard. It shows respect for the opponent. It shows respect for the opponent. The protagonist told his rival that it was time for them to exchange experiences. The man got into a fighting stance and said that the main character can't attack him. The Lucan swung his arm with all his might to knock the guy off his feet. Lin Mu was startled. He realized that he needed to react to defend himself from the blow. Lin Mu very fearfully turned away to protect himself from the blow. The guy realized to himself that Xiaojiro was much stronger than his past opponent Li Wanjue. The protagonist dodged a kick. He thought his opponent was a long way from him. Lushan swung with all his might to hit the guy with a punch. Lin kept his defenses up. The protagonist professionally dodged punches in all directions with maximum reaction. The audience cheered. They shouted and cheered for the president of the fight club. Z hesitated. She grudgingly thought to herself that an inexperienced person might think as if Xiaojiro was suppressing the protagonist. The girl noticed that the movements of the protagonist are not chaotic. It is as if he is testing the strength of the opponent. The man tried to kick the guy in the leg. He dodged it. Lin Mu excitedly thought to himself that his opponent had almost gotten him. The man bounced to the side. He was out of breath and didn't have the strength to attack further. Lucan asked grudgingly to the guy, why on earth is he only defending himself? The protagonist apologized to his opponent. He said that he had been studying his techniques and had completely forgotten that they were competing. The man was amazed. He was amazed because of the fact that the main character could study his techniques and still be on the defensive. The protagonist got into a fighting stance. He told the man that he was about to attack him. Lucian standing in the stand-up. He shouted for his opponent to show him his strength. The man suddenly noticed the protagonist snapping out of his seat and running towards him. The protagonist ran up and shoved his opponent with all his might with the palm of his hand. The man was flung over the top by the tremendous impact and flew backwards. The Lucan fighter fell to the floor. The people around him were very surprised. People did not understand what had happened. A martial artist said excitedly that suddenly he saw Lin Mu suddenly appear in front of the president. Zai was very much amazed. She realized that her friend was fighting with amazing speed. The man was lying on the floor. He was coming to and decided to try to get up. Lucan began to rise to his feet. He told his opponent that he had been careless. Lin thought to himself that he had only released some key energy, and his opponent was already unable to get up. The protagonist thought to himself that he wanted to test his accumulated power in this battle. The man stood up and prepared to fight on. He realized his gap between the Lin master, but he didn't want to stop. Lucan prepared to attack his opponent. He shouted that he would not give up so easily. Lin was surprised to think that his opponent had a fighting attitude, but it would all be useless. The man took off from his seat and ran at full speed at the protagonist. The lush was coming at the guy at full speed to hit him full force. The president told himself confidently that he absolutely had to hit Po' Boy now. The man rushed over and held his fist in front of him to deliver a crushing blow. Lucan suddenly realized to himself that he hadn't hit his target. He couldn't understand how that was possible. Lunmu grabbed the man's hand with his own hand. Luchan asked, surprised at his rival, "What kind of man is he?" The protagonist told his rival that he was a student of Dunhan University. He prepared to throw his opponent to the floor. He apologized to him. The protagonist swung around and threw his opponent to the floor with all his might. The man's head hit the floor. He didn't have time to defend himself. The Lucan raised his head and looked in front of him. He said the guy didn't have human strength. In the evening, the girl brought her friend to her family mansion. She introduced the guy to her grandfather. The old man looked at the protagonist and asked, "What are his plans with Qinglan?" Linmu smiled and told his grandfather that he didn't have any specific plans at this moment. The old man banged his hand on the table with all his might. He interrogated the guy. Did the guy refuse to marry Qinglan? The guy explained to his grandfather that he just wanted to graduate first. The old man grudgingly told the young people that they had no future. He asked angrily, "Is this just a marriage game to them?" Zhu explained to the old man that the guy would be graduating from university in 2 years. The old man pointed his finger at the guy and said that the main problem was his attitude. The grandfather told his granddaughter that after university, everyone has their own way. If the guy runs away, where will she look for him? The protagonist thought it wasn't his idea in the first place. Zhu dragged him into it. He ended up being the one to blame. The grandfather asked the girl why she had chosen this guy. He said that the lineman had no ambition. Zhu tells the old man that the main character is not at all what he says he is. The old man angrily told his companions that he would not give them consent to their marriage. The protagonist decided to intervene in the conversation. He apologized. Linmu explained that he really doesn't have any plans and doesn't want to make excuses. He added that his own future is still being planned. The main character got up from the table. He explained that he wouldn't be coming anymore. The guy headed for the exit. He said goodbye to his companions. The girl got worried. She asked the protagonist to wait. The old man told the Qing girl that her friend would never become anything outstanding. The girlfriend was yelling at the main character to stop and wait. Zhu cried. She shouted to her grandfather that he didn't understand anything at all. The old man remained seated at the table with the man. Zhu stepped aside saddened. The man said thoughtfully to his grandfather that last sentence was very stern. Grandpa explained that he wanted to check if the guy really loved the Zai girl, or if he simply only wanted to join their family. The old man explained to the man that if the guy had ulterior motives, he would make concessions. The man explained that if the protagonist came to join the Zhu family, he could be understood. The old man got to his feet and said that even if the protagonist marries Qinglan, he would not join the Ji family. The man decided he couldn't change the old man's stubborn nature. The girl's father thought to himself that Linmu is a good guy. The main character was walking and thinking to himself that he had to get angry today. He realized that his chi had become weaker. Linmu thought to himself that the original chi of his new body was very weak. That's why he was so upset. The main character was walking down an evening street. He couldn't understand why the Ji family looked down on him. Suddenly the guy stopped. He noticed something very interesting in front of him. A fat man in a brown jacket was walking down the street. He was asking for help in a frightened voice. Linmu looked at the fat man, and he showed his very familiar. He started to remember. The main character remembered that the fat guy's name was Shin Wailong. This guy used to cheat other people at school and take girls with his power. Linmu asked Fatty Shin Wailong what happened to him in the middle of the night. Shin looked at the protagonist with excitement. He asked him for help. A whole bunch of guys showed up with guns. They yelled they were going to take the fat man's life. Lin told his acquaintance that he was very lucky. He was being chased by people who wanted to kill him. Shin looked anxiously at the guy and asked if he could help him. He was in danger of dying this night. The leader of the bandits told the protagonist angrily that they only wanted one fat guy today. He demanded that the guy get out of the way. Sin asked the frightened protagonist to save him from the gangsters. Linmu said to himself that he was in a bad mood today. He decided to get even with the bandits. The ringleader asked the protagonist if he was fed up with his life and didn't want to leave. Lin told the gangsters that the fat man is his classmate, and he can't stay away. The guy ordered his subordinates to deliver the blue and the main character to him. A whole group of gun-toting thugs ran at full speed at the protagonist. Linmu said to himself reassuringly that bandits of this level would not be a problem for him. The Sin warned the protagonist in a frightened voice that these gangsters could quietly kill a man. Linmu prepared to fight off the group of bandits attacking him. The protagonist prepared to teach the criminals a lesson. He got into a fighting stance. Linmu decided that he would beat his opponents to a pulp. Only then would they learn their lesson. The bandits with swords ran at the protagonist. He stood still and waited for them. Lin concentrated. He prepared to fight off his first opponent. The protagonist pointed his palm forward to fend off the first attacker. The guy got hit pretty hard right off the bat. He started flying off to the side. Shin looked fearfully at the protagonist. He still felt like Lin was making a mistake. The guy flies off to the side after a powerful punch from the protagonist. Lin Mu was very happy and satisfied. He realized that he had succeeded. The fat man was surprised. He said to himself that he was seeing a scene from a martial arts movie. The main character was walking down the street. Someone ran after him and asked him to wait. Lin Mu stopped. He looked with interest to see who had just called out to him. The protagonist saw a battered fat man standing next to him. Sin thanked his friend for saving him last night. Lin looked at the fat man and said no thanks. Sin once again thanked the guy for saving his life. The fat man dropped to his knees and said in a tragic voice that he would always follow the protagonist. The lynx inquired of the fat man what kind of people were chasing him. Shin explained that he had insulted the leader of a group called Pihusin. After that, he had brought trouble upon himself. 2 students were walking by. One of them said that they should hurry as there was some spectacle at the school gate. Sin stopped the boy and asked why on earth were they in such a hurry to get to the school gates. The student said that the ice girl Ji wants to fight with another beautiful girl. The protagonist got worried. He couldn't believe that Su could be fighting someone right now. Sin told his friend that it would be a good spectacle. He offered to go and watch it. The main character told his friend that he wasn't in the mood. He suggested that Fatty walk alone. Sin grabbed his friend's hand. He said he'd help the guy unwind. The protagonist said grudgingly to his friend that he could walk on his own and not to drag him. The girls stood a short distance apart. One of the students said that they had been standing like that for a long time. The girl with blue hair said grudgingly to her rival to act. Fatty, along with the main character, made their way through the crowd to see what was going on. The protagonist was very much surprised. He couldn't understand what the girl Satu was doing here. The girlfriend turned around. She looked at the protagonist with great interest. Lin asked his acquaintance with great excitement, "Why did she come here?" Situ, as if nothing had happened, raised her hand and greeted her friend. The students around were very surprised. They couldn't believe that this beautiful girl knew the main character. Su warned the protagonist and told him to be careful. Su explained to the protagonist that Cheetah had inquired about his whereabouts. Perhaps the girl had some kind of score to settle with him. Seitu looked at the protagonist and said that he's a big hit with women. She noted that the guy is protected by beautiful girls. The main character explained to his girlfriend that Seitu isn't a bad person. They're just acquaintances. The fat man told everyone present that there had been a misunderstanding. He demanded that the students disperse. The protagonist asked Satu, "So why did she come to Dunha University?" The girl smiled and said that she had transferred to this place from Kyoto University. 31. Ji asked suspiciously to her interlocutor, why did she transfer here? Seitu told her interlocutors with a smile that she would like to become classmates with them in the future. She would also like to ask them for some advice. The students looked with very great admiration at the girl's picture on their phones. They called her a beauty. One guy said that the position of their university hottie could easily change. At the same time, a group of girls were sitting at a table and talking among themselves. One of them asked, "Where did the G come from?" Xing told in a calm voice that the G girl was called the Snow Queen. Situ said cheerfully that if a girl is called a Snow Queen, it means she is arrogant and indifferent. The girlfriend brought the main character a bento in a box. She offered to eat it together. The main character thanked the girl and said he wouldn't eat that much. The girl explained that G is only very good to the main character. Satu told cheerfully to her new girlfriends that G is their rival in love. The student got angry. She shouted at her interlocutor not to talk nonsense. The girl calmly replied that there was no reason for them to like the main character. Singh added that it was impossible. Situ told her girlfriends with a smile that she was only joking. At this time, a man came up from behind. He asked the protagonist if he was Mr. Lin. Su said grudgingly to the stranger that they were here to eat. The man said good-naturedly that something had happened. The master wants to discuss it with Mr. Lin. Lin noticed a large man standing in front of him. Normally, such people don't usually look for a fight. He asked the stranger who was his master. Zai was still standing with the box in her hands. She asked her interlocutor, why didn't the master come himself? The main character told his girlfriend not to hit on people. He added that he would drive there and back. The man bowed to the protagonist and told him to follow him. Lin Mu waved goodbye to the girl and told her not to worry. Ji asked the guy to be more careful. The main character was approaching the car with other people. The man told the guy to wait for a while. The guard approached the gentleman and informed him that the lineman had arrived. The man said the guy could get in the car. A man with glasses asked the protagonist if he remembered him. Lin replied with a smile to the interlocutor that the latter was the father of the girl of the bathtub. The man told the guy they'd only met once, but the guy remembered him. The man told the protagonist that he was the only one he could rely on this time. Lin told the interlocutor that Van was his girlfriend and promised to help with all the problems. He inquired what the girl's condition was now. The man said the rehab went well. He invited the guy to visit when he had time. Lin told the male that he would come to see him in a couple of days. The interlocutor replied to the male that they had an agreement. The protagonist asked the man what he was looking for him for this time. The man said he wasn't going to drag his feet. He started giving details. The protagonist, together with his companion, arrived at the building. The man told the guy that things were very bad. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been looking for him. Lin was climbing the stairs. He told his interlocutor that he was not a doctor. The man demanded of the guy that he work his ass off. He added that they'd get him whatever he needed. Two very excited military men were sitting on the sofa. They were waiting for Mr. Wang. One of the military men on the couch cheerfully greeted the incoming man. Mr. Van asked his interlocutors how the head was feeling right now. The military man replied that the head was still in a coma. He explained that this did not bode well. There was an old man lying on the bed under an oxygen mask. The man said the chapter was of great importance to China. Mr. Wang explained that if there is no head, China will face serious problems. The main character told the man that he would do what he could. He asked him to wait outside. Mr. Van headed for the exit with the military. He reminded the protagonist that the chapter's life was in his hands. One of the officers asked the man if the young man could be trusted. Mr. Wang said the guy saved his daughter. He believes him. The main character walked up to the lying old man and took his hand. He realized that first, he had to find out the cause of the illness. Lin first decided to run the qi energy through the patient's pulse. The old man's reaction surprised the protagonist. He found it strange. Lin noted to himself that the patient had no obvious organ abnormalities. Such abnormalities usually existed in people who had reached their limit. The protagonist thought about it. He decided to himself that he might have missed something. Lin decided to himself that he could try again. He put his hands on the patient and decided to direct more qi this time. The protagonist was deep in thought. He couldn't figure out what the patient's problem was. Lin Mu looked at the old man's body. He realized that he had a heart problem. The main character realized that the patient has a lot of dirt in the artery of the right atrium. This causes a prolonged lack of oxygen in the body. After that, the body starts to malfunction. Lin Mu decided happily to himself that now it was time for the small matter to be completed. The protagonist realized that he needed to use qi directly now. This would help cure the ailment. Mr. Van stood waiting by the door. One of the soldiers said it was unknown whether the head could survive all this. The doors suddenly opened. The main character came out into the corridor. He said that the head was fine and would wake up soon. The soldiers got very excited. The man asked the guy, "Did he really cure the old man so quickly?" Mr. Wang inquired of the lad, "How long would the head last?" Lin explained that in elderly people, the body was already severely depleted. If an old man's energy was dead, he would last for about half a year. 3 days later, the old man recovered from his convalescence. The military man was very displeased. He pounded his hand on the chair with all his might. The commander-in-chief's name was Duan Fusheng. He angrily shouted that as long as he was alive, no one would touch the East China Sea. Mr. Van told the old man to take it easy. He advised that the commander should not be nervous. Duan said thoughtfully, if he could live a couple more years, it would be good. Mr. Van told the old man not to worry. He promised that this difficulty would end. Duan replied to the man that he himself knows better than his own body. He added that he did not expect to be rescued. Duan calmed down. He asked the man if the guy who saved him was coming today. Mr. Van told the old man that he had already done everything, and the protagonist would arrive soon. A knock sounded at the door. A subordinate informed the commander-in-chief that a guest had arrived. The man jumped up from his seat. He ran to the door to meet the guy. A man introduced the guy who saved his life to the commander-in-chief. The protagonist bowed to the old man and greeted him. Then he gave his name. Duan told the protagonist to take a seat soon. Lin thanked the old man. The commander-in-chief told the guy that he wasn't a soldier, so he could just call him Grandpa Dwayne. The old man told the protagonist cheerfully that if it wasn't for his help, he wouldn't have lived to see today. Lin told Grandpa that he was exaggerating. He explained that he couldn't eliminate the focus of the disease. Duan said with gratitude to the guy that he was able to save him, and that was already a very good thing. The old man said that at his age he no longer takes certain things seriously. He added that it is absolutely irrelevant whether he dies or not. Lin told the old man with great joy that he admired him very much. A man came in. He told the old man that the food was ready. He suggested we talk at the table. Mr. Duan suggested his companions have some fun and drink a couple of sips to lighten the mood. Mr. Wang reminded the commander-in-chief that he had just recovered. 3 hours later, the protagonist told Grandpa Dwayne that he'd had enough drinking for the day. The girl was at home. Her secretary came to her with a report. The girl informed her boss that there was new progress today regarding the ordinance. Saitu cheerfully told her subordinate that she could keep talking. The secretary reported that the protagonist had arrived at the war ministry after lunch. He had been there for 3 hours. The secretary asked her subordinate what the protagonist had been doing in the war ministry for so long. The secretary replied that it was still unknown. The supervisor grudgingly told her subordinate to get to work as soon as possible. The secretary bowed to her boss and said that she would go to execute everything right away. Mistress was alone. She sat on the couch and thought about the main character. Situ was deep in thought. She couldn't understand why the main character was going to the war ministry. The next day, students gathered near the entrance of Dunhai University. There was a guy standing there with a bouquet of blue flowers. The students were surprised. They did not understand who it was standing at the university gate so early in the morning. The guy with the flowers was waiting for the girl. One of the people said the girlfriend still hadn't shown up. One of the students spotted the latest model Lamborghini pulling up to the university entrance. The race car stopped and a girl Satu got out of there. Someone shouted happily that she had arrived. The student took off her glasses and was surprised. She didn't understand why there were so many people at the gates of the university. The guy said happily to the girl that she had finally come. Satu greeted the student and called his name Yan Lanchi. Situ asked the guy with great surprise, "What on earth is he doing here?" Yan explained to his girlfriend with a smile that he had brought her oriental blue roses. The overjoyed student took the flowers from the guy's hands and thanked him. The guy wondered to the girl, so why didn't she warn him that she had transferred to Dunhai University? Satu told her friend that she wanted to move to Dunhai. Here she can spend time with her parents. The girl asked her friend what he wanted to say. The student looked away. He told his girlfriend that she moved to this university because of a boyfriend. Situ was very surprised and worried. She looked at the guys coming to the entrance. The student noticed the Ling approaching in the company of her familiar fat man. Yan asked the girl what the main character said to her at the birthday party. "I told my friend unhappily that it was all her own business." Yan looked angrily at his interlocutor and said that she was his fiancée. So he would question her about everything. Situ replied to the guy that she wouldn't tell him anything even if she was his wife. The student got really angry. He asked his girlfriend, "Does she really like Ling Mu?" The girl turned around and started to walk away. She told Yang not to hit on her again. The student angrily asked his girlfriend if she understood what she just said. Situ angrily asked her friend, did he really think she was joking? Sin told the protagonist that there was something going on near the university entrance. The protagonist looked in front of him and noticed that the adult guy was refining the female chi energy. Sin turned around and asked his friend, "Why is he so cheerful?" Lin told his friend that they had to go. The fat man replied to the guy that the fun wasn't over yet. Yan was very angry. He didn't like the main character looking at his girlfriend. The student thought angrily to himself that the protagonist was not going to make it. On the evening of the same day, the main character was walking with his friend. He asked the fat man where they were going. Sin told his friend to be cool. The guy's gonna find out soon. The students approached the large doors. Servants near the entrance invited them inside. The main character looked in surprise in front of him. He realized that they had gotten into a charity dinner. Lin said with surprise to his friend's interest in charity projects. Sin said slyly that it wasn't just a charity project. He added that the guy himself would find out soon enough. The protagonist and his friend were walking through the room. Suddenly the guy felt something. Lin Mu didn't realize what was happening. He felt that something was beginning to happen to his ring. The fatty asked excitedly to his friend, "What happened?" The Lin even turned pale. The main character replied that he had eaten something bad. He wondered where the restroom was. Sin told his friend where the restroom was. The protagonist headed for the exit and asked that Fatty wait for him. Lin Mu locked himself in a restroom stall. There was no one around him. He was by himself. 13, the protagonist wondered. He couldn't figure out what had happened. The guy realized that the ring wanted to break free. If he didn't suppress it, the consequences could be unimaginable. Lin thought that he was for obtaining the ring, almost died. In the cultivation world next, there should be no mistakes. Suddenly from the side, some girl told the protagonist to come out. He came out of the stall and noticed the girl next to him. He wondered what she was doing here. The protagonist told his companion that she was actually in the men's room. I asked the guy, is he really interested in charity work? Lin replied to the girl that he was just brought here by the fat man. He asked his interlocutor how she was doing here. The girl angrily said that she saw her boyfriend Yang in the morning. He misunderstood her relationship with the protagonist. Satu promised to sort it out. The protagonist asked her girlfriend, does she mean the guy at the university gate asking for her love? The girl grabbed the guy's clothes and said as he noticed Yan's murderous aura. The protagonist calmly replied to his girlfriend that he had noticed the aura. C2 explained irritably to the protagonist that Yang shouldn't be a problem for him. She warned that the student was very good at various tricks. Lin told his girlfriend that he didn't realize she was so concerned for his safety. The girl told the main character that she would be so worried about him if it weren't for his instructions. The protagonist thanked the girl for the warning. He promised to be careful. Saitu got ready to leave. She asked that the protagonist save himself. At that time, some man went into the toilet and noticed a guy and a girl in there. He was surprised. Linmu felt very awkward. He glanced sideways at the man who had entered. The stranger was surprised. He realized that the young men were in such a hurry that they had decided to do everything in the men's room. There was a charity auction on stage. One of the bidders said 10 million. The auctioneer with a hammer in his hands repeated the bid of 10 million several times. The presenter banged his gavel on the table and shouted that the goods had been sold for 10 million. The presenter thanked Miss Lin for her help with the charity. The protagonist thought to himself in surprise that the vase could be sold for 10 million. Fatty said that all the people who came here, they came for charity. The presenter introduced the next exhibit. It was an ancient necklace. The value of this thing could not be recognized. The auctioneer explained that no one had ever been able to find out the composition of the necklace. The host pointed with his hand to the side and said cheerfully, "Nothing in the world can damage this piece of jewelry." The fat man was very surprised. He couldn't believe that nothing could harm an ordinary piece of jewelry. The protagonist thought to himself that after the necklace appeared, the ring's reaction became stronger. The guy thought deeply and seriously. He decided there might be a connection between his ring and the necklace at the auction. One of the bidders held up his sign and said he was offering 5 million for the goods. Shin was very surprised at such a big bet. The protagonist told his friend that prices would still rise. The presenter pointed his finger into the audience and said that Mr. Liu was offering 5 million. He asked the audience, "Can anyone offer more?" A girl with red hair held up a sign and said she was willing to pay 6 million. People in the audience started bidding very actively. The price went up to 15 million. The man raised his hand and said confidently that he was offering 20 million. The auctioneer announced that Mr. Liu was offering 20 million. He asked who could do more. The fat man was surprised. He couldn't understand who was willing to pay 20 million for a stupid necklace. Lin explained that the money would go to charity. One of the participants held up a sign and said he was paying 50 million. The participant was surprised. He couldn't believe that someone would be willing to pay 50 million at once. The presenter said Mr. Ao wants to pay 50 million. He asked, "Can anyone give more?" The auctioneer repeated the amount of 50 million 3 times. The necklace was won by Mr. Ao Xiaolong. The auctioneer cheerfully said to thank the AO bidder for his contribution to the charity. The fat man from his seat said that he knew AO Xiaolun. The protagonist asked the Shinya how much did he know the man. A friend told the protagonist in confidence that the head of the AO family is an important figure. Fatty said that the AO family attaches great importance to the necklace. It means that the jewelry is not so ordinary anymore. Lin remembered that there were 6 other ring-like treasures in the cultivation world. These 7 treasures were known as the ancient immortality armor. The protagonist thought the necklace might be part of an ancient armor of immortality.